I'd like to welcome you, first of all, to the workshop for utilities that is being conducted tonight by the town board, and various staff members are here, as well as members of the public. And may we start tonight with a moment of silence. We've lost a young man in the community yesterday, Tyson Miller, and if we could keep him and his family in mind as we open with a moment of silence. Thank you very much. During the process of this meeting, we'll be exceedingly rude because we'll be taking breaks to come around the back here and feed ourselves and not be sharing. And I'm sorry for that, but we do need to keep the board strong. So maybe it would be a good idea for us to go through the audience members, and if people could just state who they are and what connection or interest they have, if any, to the project. You can be here just without even having a particular interest or role. So if we might start.
Tim Baldwin from Kidney Creek. We're working on wet infrastructure, which have parts of this.
I'm Carl Sharpen with the Wooten Company, and we're working for the town as our engineer on the wastewater aspects.
I'm Randy Voller. I was the former mayor, and Cindy asked me, the mayor, to come here. Of course, I've been working with Chatham Park on this force main at Sanford since that started probably 4 or 5 years ago.
I'm Fred Royal, town engineer. I've been working with Wooten and others, Chatham Park design teams on various aspects of sewer and water.
I'm Charlie Davis with the Wooten Company. Like Carl said, we've been working with the town on the wastewater treatment and distribution aspect of the project.
Hi, I'm John Justice, customer of the town.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I said I am a customer of the facility.
Oh, fine.
And that favor.
Thank you.
I'm John Poteet, Public Utilities Director.
I'm overall Preston Development Company, Chatham Park.
I'm Chuck Smith, Preston Development Company in Chatham Park.
Mike Myers, I'm with the environment, working on the reclaimed water system.
Tim Smith, Chatham Park.
Heather Mitchell, I'm the finance director for the town.
Ronnie Odom, Withers Ravenel, engineer working with Chatham Park. Robert Rose, Chatham Park.
On this town.
Red Land, planning board.
And so I'll turn it over at this point. We have an agenda, which is before you, which Brian Griesbeck is going to do the introduction regarding the purpose for our meeting tonight.
Thank you, Mayor Ferry. The purpose tonight is a workshop for the board to get a chance to discuss and ask technical questions and aspects of the two really significant capital projects that the town has going in planning processes right now. Mainly the wastewater improvements, and then also as well the north side water system improvements that have been in planning for a bit over a year now. The purpose with those capital projects is to get a better understanding and to hopefully develop something of a comfort level after asking questions and after hearing some more detailed information in a very focused way that we'll be trying to do here tonight with the consultants and with the developer on these major capital projects. And then, two, for the board to provide feedback to staff and to consultants about what we're seeing tonight and possibly give some direction where we need and see where we have to go moving forward. The note that I want to make about the north side water system improvements tonight is mainly that based on some of our conversation that we had at Monday's board meeting, that I got the impression maybe the board wants to focus on the wastewater projects in particular. So if the conversation and the questions really kind of take us in that direction, that's fine. we're certainly prepared to talk about the north side water system improvements tonight, but if you want to delay that conversation or only spend a limited amount of time on that conversation, that's certainly allowable considering the task that you have in front of you with the proposed wastewater system improvements to this point. As Mayor Perry mentioned, we also have Chatham Park here tonight to help us talk a little bit about their development and how their development factors into a few of the capital projects that we're going to be talking about. Two of the capital projects that we're going to be talking about. Well, actually all of the capital projects in Chatham Park. So I think in that way I structured the agenda so that we could get a basic background of Chatham Park and how the utilities and plans maybe play into that. And with that, if that's okay, Tim Baldwin is here tonight from McKim and Creed, who's been one of the principals really on the water system improvements and the decentralized facility, but factoring that in with the overall wastewater system needs. I think tonight I give you an idea of where everything is and kind of set the table for what we're talking about here moving forward. Without further ado, Mr. Baldwin.
Thank you, Brian. Mayor, board. First, I would caution you, Mayor, you may want to rethink the notion about feeding us because I will talk a lot less with food in my mouth, necessity. So you may change your mind later on in the meeting. As Brian said, first step maybe to step back, pull up the altitude, give you a chance to sort of take a look at the bigger picture on everything, trying to look at everything involved in. And I've heard a lot of good comments about the maps. I take no credit for those because that's all Brian and Tim's idea, and Robbie with Withers put those maps together. Did a great job, so I'm going to go ahead and use them now. And Brian, given the possibility of pushing the water to the backside, maybe getting to it, maybe not, want to just wait on that orientation entirely and just totally...
No, I think orientation's the key word. Show where it is. Let's not get too far into the weeds with it just yet.
Right. Okay. Sounds good. So I'm going to make my way over here to help with that. And Tim will be disappointed if I don't use his fickle finger of fate here. So let's go ahead. We'll get the water out of the way then, in a way. But I'll start with sort of the overall. The purple boundary may be just a little bit hard to see from some spots in the audience, but that is the boundary of Chatham Park, basically. And Tim will correct me if I misspeak about anything. So, and from the water system, so basically you're looking at this outline being Chatham Park. And just to get even more oriented, obviously, you probably know this, but I won't take it for granted. Of course, we have the Haw River here feeding into the lake down here. We have 64 coming across with the interchange splitting the bypass and Business 64 staying. Center of town here. And later on, Charlie will talk about the route down to Sanford, but way down here, then we're looking, well, you won't see it on this map, but back here on the sewer map, I'm going to just cover ground the same way. You'll see the Sanford sewer plant down here nestled just on the south side of the Deep River. And, that routing to get there, which I'll talk more detail about that later on. A lot of these facilities are on both sewer and water on both maps. So, again, where we'll talk about the decentralized water plant, wastewater plant here at the intersection of Eubanks Road and Business 64, here to just past the interchange. The existing town's sewer plant sitting right here with discharge to Robeson Creek. Hidden a little bit here. The sites for the new elevated water storage tanks. First of all, 300,000 gallon tank for potable water. Later, a larger tank that could go here or could go over near the standpipe. That's still in discussion for later on the next phase down the road. And then repurposing the small tank for reclaimed water storage. The town's water plant sitting up here, not too far from the river. And again, for facilities, major trunk arterial coming down 15501, which we would be connecting to pretty much provide the basic main feed into Chatham Park over here into that water tank, and then distributed
throughout the development eventually, with the initial phase being a large pipeline coming down Chatham Parkway here, getting as far as 64 Business. Smaller lines that aren't shown on this map to service some of the initial adjacent properties that are being developed right now in early stages, and I'll talk about that too when we get into some subsequent slides. Pretty much covered that same thing as far as sewer goes with the site of a decentralized plant, the site of your existing plant, and again, facilities that will play into it later on, basically the 3M tank and the 3M quarry and plant here that's taking reclaimed water from you right now. And those will both play into this discussion. Yeah, once we build this plant, again showing on this map, is the effluent line, the treated reclaimed water line, the main line coming out of the plant over here to the town's facility for either discharge or continuation to the 3M plant. Since it's shown on the map, I want to point that out to you right now, but we'll talk more about that later as well as some other things.
Tim, quick question. 3M elevated tank, what's the volume on that?
I honestly don't know what your systems tank is. Fred, do you know that off the top of your head?
$500,000? Yeah, okay. So we should not be confused and think that it's 3 million.
Right. The 2 million, we have to do 2 M's for 1,000, right? 3 mm?
Yeah. The ground storage.
Ground storage. Just pause right there for any questions, any redirection, anything I've missed, anything I should have said or didn't say, any clarifications. All good? Okay. We'll get to that later too. Now the one thing we were going to sort of tag team, this first item I have on here is sort of overall system needs, which is again driven by the flow needs. So I don't know, Brian, do you want us to go ahead and toggle for that flow chart or just wait on that? Because that's really what defines the overall system needs.
Whenever you're ready to show the flow chart.
Are we okay doing that? Charlie, you okay doing that?
Yeah, I mean, there's some things that lead into that flow chart, which are the flow projections and things.
Well, I can do that. I just skip that part about the needs with just in the high level. If you want to do that.
Yeah, we can go back to that later.
Okay, all right. I'll go back to that. So just as the skimpiest of previews, what you'll see later is an overall system 20-year need for the town of approximately 4.5 million gallons a day, portion between Chatham Park and all other growth in the town. And more importantly, not more importantly, but also importantly, fairly immediate needs for the growth that's happening right now in the town and in Chatham Park, as well as outside of that area. So I want to just go right to the phasing. This is mine.
I was just wondering if these would it be okay maybe if we move this over? I know you kind of have your backs to that.
No. Well, we've got it in our hands as well. Do we not?
Whatever works.
Again, I've been asked to stay as non-technical and out of the weeds as possible, so I'll try to stay out of there. You drag me in if you want me to. I'd be happy to go there as long as you want me to. So feel free. I think more of a discussion than a presentation probably works.
Well, this is a technical discussion. I think the caution was don't get as technical as you sometimes are capable of.
Okay.
Can we take,
a piece of rope.
Can we take questions from audience back here if needed?
That's up to the mayor. It's a workshop intended for if you guys are comfortable with the amount of discussion that's taking place and you feel like it's purely up to the mayor.
And I'm also, it's at your preference if you'd like to have that back and forth as we go or save things up. I'll leave that totally up to you. I'm perfectly happy to discuss as we go, or save it up at the end, so I'll let you proceed however you would like. So in terms of phasing, since phase 1 is very compressed anyway, I've segmented that into what I would call phase 1A and phase 1B. And what I call 1A, there is already some growth and some imminent that is happening, that there is some amount of capacity left in the sewer plant that you're granted to that growth to be tributary to the system, be treated at your current treatment plant. And of course, those, you probably know, those growth areas have been up here just north of the 15501 interchange, and there is a new school and a little bit of residential development imminent down here in this area close to town. Those are both close enough and with facilities nearby that those are getting water service from existing water lines. They're getting sewer service by connecting to existing sewer lines that are tributary into the town system. But again, right now that capacity available is around 30,000 gallons a day, with another 30 or so reserved for other users. So it's not a lot. It goes pretty fast. It will be this year and next year for the most part. What we call 1B then is this decentralized treatment plant we talked about of developing, in this area we talked about.
Tim, can I stop you right there for a
Certainly.
second? And Fred, so I know you said 50.
It's more than 50 range.
Okay, so you got 30 and 30, 60, same ballpark. All right. Is that to the 80% limit? That's to a 90%? That's 100%.
We can allocate up to 100% of the permitted hydraulic treatment capacity of the plant. So if we're showing, we recently allocated 35,000 plus or minus for Chatham Park. And what we have remaining today is in the 50s ballpark of allocatable flow.
So 80% it only deals with tributary?
80% deals with the discharge side.
Okay.
Going out to the creek.
So you can allocate in excess of the 80% permit limit. You cannot exceed that on the discharge side.
Right.
Okay. And at what stage can we go to 90% discharge?
So we're already doing our planning and phasing, so we've met the 80% rule requirement. So at the 90%, we have to be under authorization to construct mode for a new plant. That's generally the state law.
So what allows you to go beyond 80%?
As long as we're planning.
Okay.
As long as we're planning,
Okay.
designing, literally what we're doing.
Basically doing this report, this engineering report that we have been doing.
Says we have a plan to do something about it.
We've already been doing that. Actually, there's one already submitted that's being reviewed now.
Okay.
I'll get into that a little bit. That's kind of my little part of the project.
Yeah, it just helps me to understand that at this phase or stage. So 90% is you have to have design, have a contract, be under construction. Which one of those? All of those? Sorry.
Take a step back and clarify a little bit.
Okay.
The allocation that you're talking about is paper allocation
Yep.
up to 100%.
Yep.
So you basically have about 50,000 gallons a day left, and you can allocate up to 100%, which is what you're permitted to, what you have permitted currently under your NDS permit. The 80-90 rule really does not relate to the paper flow allocation. It relates strictly to the discharge. And basically what we're looking at is once your facility has 12 consecutive months of its flow capacity exceeding 80% of what its rated capacity is, then you have to start planning for what your next steps are.
Okay.
Once you exceed 90%, and again, it's 12 consecutive months of your monthly flow being greater than 90% of what your permitted flow is, then you have to move to implementation. So the allocation that we're talking about on paper up to 100 does not really translate to the discharge. It's sort of like paper flow versus wetness, if that makes sense.
Yep.
I just want to try to clarify the differences.
Is there anything that prevents you from exceeding 100% in paper flow if you're tributary flow is still below 80% or 90% or?
The regulators require that 100% is the maximum you can go, and they will not permit any flow. Because basically they look at what are you permitted for, what is currently tributary, what has been planned but is not tributary, and when that all adds up to 100%, that rule was put in because many municipalities would exceed their 100%, probably thinking that maybe some of the growth wouldn't happen, so they were hedging a bit. But the rules are in place now that prevent you from going above 100%.
Okay, great, thank you.
What impact would the I&I repairs that are about to be done have on any of this? Would this increase our daily capacity
It could if we hit the nail on the head with the repair. We're going to. We know we have more to do than what we have funding to do. So, in fact, Becky just hosted a pre-construction meeting today with the contractor, which is great. We're getting ready to start that project, but it's not going to necessarily reduce our wet weather flows into the plant, which adds to the monthly average influence, which impacts the number that we can allocate at the end of the day. We hope that it reduces significantly wet weather flows every time we go out there and repair a manhole or repair a connection line of pipe, but we don't know. We won't know until we do the work, it rains, and then we monitor. We'll see what happens. The intent is to reduce it until we get down to some magic number where maybe 10% is left of what we're used to seeing. But it's a programmatic thing over many years because of the cost.
I guess I've been looking at the history of this, and at each step along the way, 2011 when a different company did an examination of the capacities and the flow issues. At every stage along the way, it's as though the wolf was being cried at each stage. Well, we're in 2016 now, and is the wolf really at the door, or is the wolf just sort of out there grazing somewhere?
It's a great question. When I came on board here, we had just done the Credo Street project, and the flows significantly went down, as I recall. And then 2 Novembers ago, it spiked back up again, the wet weather flows. And no one really knew where or why. It just shot up. And since then, we've done the what's called the SSES, the survey work, the smoke testing, and all that. And we've discovered where a lot of deficiencies exist. That didn't include the Credo Street area necessarily, but it included a lot of other areas of town. So that's where we're tackling now. And we've got more that we know of that we need to repair after this project is over. Lining pipes mostly. It's mostly lining pipes and repairing manholes that have deficiencies.
Part of the challenge, Mayor, is and everyone is that it is a bit of a moving target, as Fred has mentioned. There are no 2 storm events are ever the same. So calibrating what flow came in to what could have come in is always a little bit of an art form, and then building credibility with the state that you have in fact removed that on a consistent basis for them to then grant you access to that I&I that you theoretically removed and reduced your average flow. Because they too have seen the same thing where it's gone this year and it's back 2 years from now, and so they're a little conservative about letting you then go ahead and allocate that. Feel good with that? Okay. So that segues into the Phase 1B in terms of there not being sufficient flow availability in terms of allocation for the magnitude of the growth that will happen in the next couple of years, at least with Chatham Park, possibly with other developments. So again, the plan for the decentralized plant was to start building that at 250,000 gallons per day for the first phase. It will be complete and operational in early 2018, you know, barring anything unforeseen popping up to delay it again. It can be expanded past that. We've got a little bit of a site plan here that you can see, and again, we're at Eubanks, 64 Business, and this orange is the guts of the plant, the reactors, and the lab space, the admin space, chemical, electrical rooms, you know, all that. And it could be expanded in this footprint up to about 1 million gallons a day if it ever required that. But again, the first phase would be 250 with a permitted design of 500,000. And that's a key element that we'll get into here in just a minute. Phase 2 we're calling the Sanford project. And again, you know, Charlie will talk some about the timeline on that when he gets the podium here. But then any expansion of the decentralized plant is really highly contingent upon how fast Sanford can be made operational. So if that plant is still under capacity, when Sanford's operational, then any additional flow would go to Sanford. If Sanford lags and there's more growth stacked up and the allocation is tapped out, then the next 250 phase could be built to be able to keep receiving that flow. But the idea is to phase into that as deliberately as we can until the bigger project Sanford's complete. And pull back, wait for Sanford to be fairly fully utilized, and at that point what we call is phase 3. And again, these guys will talk about that as well. There are going to be multiple options for that phase 3, whether it is sending more flow to Sanford through an IBT, whether it's getting water back from Sanford to diminish that IBT, getting reuse back from Sanford to diminish the IBT, expand this decentralized plant, or even another greenfield, larger regional plant of your own locally, or any other regional options that might pop up between now and then, because that might be 10 years or more out in the future. And things change, obviously. So that's sort of the phasing, if you will, just at sort of that high level. So again, I'll pause. Any questions, discussion about that planned phased approach? And I don't know if we need to revisit, you saw this last time I was here, a few of these slides, so none of this is you've seen for the first time in terms of the initial capacity, the nature of the facility. I don't think we need to go into that technicality unless you'd ask me to, and I could.
Tim, I'm sorry, I apologize.
Sure.
Could you go back? So I see the phase B, 0.25 MGD in 2018, that's operational.
Correct.
And what, the end of 2018, middle, beginning?
We think early 18.
Early.
Things are proceeding on the path they're on right now. We expect that to be in the first quarter of 18.
And that relies on a discharge point at the existing Pittsburgh plant?
Yes, and that will be one of the next topics, is the priority of use of the output of that plant. And since you asked that question, why don't I just go ahead and skip to that. And you're a few bullets down there. But again, our first priority is to service the 3M contract of reuse that you hold right now. So once Sanford's in place and your plant is repurposed, then this will supply the reclaimed water to satisfy that 3M contract. Our second priority is to maximize every other reuse potential there is. Irrigation, toilet flushing, any other purposes approved for it in Chatham Park or outside of Chatham Park if there's other opportunities for that. And our last resort is the discharge, is to put it in Robeson Creek. That would be through that shared NPDES permit that the town holds. And again, this bullet right above it, the town currently holds a total discharge permit of 3.22 million gallons per day. That's split between Robeson Creek and the Haw River. It was initially 750 into Robeson, 2.47 into the Haw River. The town went through a procedure to transfer part of the Haw River discharge back up into Robeson Creek. So now the discharge permit situation is 1.249 in Robeson. They added 499 to Robeson Creek, which is just the level below an environmental assessment. And the remaining 1.97 into the Haw River. So what we're saying, planning, asking, discussing is sharing that Robeson Creek discharge between the current town plant, which is right now at 750, and the new decentralized plant of up to 499 or 500. That's why you'll see both 500 and 499 up here, and it's an artifice of the discharge permit total. It would have to be 499 to add to the 750. The plant is nominally 500,000. First building 250, and perhaps expanding to the second 250 chunk to get up to 500 at some point. And again, that point is totally dependent on how fast Sanford is operational and available. Now, while I'm on that, let me go ahead and apologize. We're going to get a little out of order, but it's orderly in your thought process where we're talking. So we talked about allocations, and we talked about the town's plan and bumping up to 100%. We will have a permitted plant, assuming we get the discharge permit situation agreed upon and settled and all that. One of the steps will be modifying discharge permits. So we would have, or the town technically would have, a discharge permit of 500,000 at this plant, 750 at the town's plant. The state is going to, we've had this happen before, they will let us allocate against that plant, whether that flow is in Chatham Park necessarily or not. So at least temporarily, some of that 500 can be available to allocate against wherever the town growth is. So we will have an interconnection between the systems. So technically, that paper permit of 500 translates into another short-term benefit for the town to allocate growth, whether it's Chatham Park, somewhere, or some other development. Did I explain that at all clearly? Do you understand what that means?
I still need your help.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd like you to reiterate it.
Okay, so, water here, I apologize. Okay, so right now, the town's treatment plant has permitted 750,000 gallons per day. As Fred just said, you've got actual flow of some number, and the additional paper allocations added to that number are coming up to around 700. So there's around 50,000 left, give or take, I think is what I just Fred said, that you can allocate against. And that's it. No more permitted developments once you're up to that 750. If we're on track for a 2018 occupancy, we will have a permitted plant of 500 over on this side of town.
You have a permitted plant, but you don't have any place to put it.
Well, we won't have a permit until we get the NPDES situation straightened out. Technically, see, now I get more technical when you ask this question, we will have a permit. The state is going to give us a zero flow authorization to construct so that the plant construction can start and move quickly. And then the flow amount that is permitted for will change when the NPDES permit is straightened out. So it allows that to move as quickly as possible and be ready for use. So we will and we won't have the permit, if that makes sense, right? Once the NPDES permit is settled, modifications are made, the new permit's issued, then we'll have theoretically, a 499 plant or 500 plant right there. So when that plant is built, it's built at 250. Like with your 750 plant, the state looks at that as, okay, your actual flow and whatever is left between that and 250, that's what you can allocate. But in this case, they will allocate against a permitted expansion. If you have a permitted expansion on the shelf, approved by the state, ready for construction, you can allocate against that permitted expansion as well. So that other 250 that isn't built, may never be built, can be allocated against. And as long as we're interconnected with the town, then it doesn't matter where the flow is. It could be wheeled around town and get to whatever plant it needs to get to by being interconnected between this plant and the current plant. So that 250 becomes that extra 250 becomes an allocation tool to use. That the flow may never go to that plant. It won't matter. As soon as Sanford's built, it's a paper tiger to allocate paper flow against.
But in truth, but actually what happens is that you need a portion of our
permit in order to be able to function?
The plant needs firm capacity of some description, right? That they know water isn't destroyed unless you're going into evaporative coolers, in that case it is. Well, by and large, they need to see where does the flow go after you treat it. So, and, you know, a lot of it will go to reuse, but there's no track record established of how much reuse is being used to convert that into firm capacity. So it's things that are under your control, whether it's a dedicated land application site or a discharge. Those are the things that the state would see as a place for the water to go. Certainly the most expedient, cost-effective way to do that is to apportion the existing discharge permit that isn't being used for anything right now. So, yes. I guess technically we could build spray fields all over the place and not discharge, but that would be a terrible use of resources.
Well, isn't there already a spray field at Townsend off Pittsburgh Montreal Road?
There is. It was permitted under 2H for industrial flow. So we will need, or would need, to get that modified to accept domestic waste, and that permit modified and reissued accordingly. So that actually is in process also as well. So that could be also available. The advantage of that place, that yeah, that could be available for actual flow if it came to that point where, say, we even got up to 1.249 eventually, and for some reason, I mean, all the earth between here and Sanford was a sinkhole, and we didn't get that pipe filled in a couple of years, yeah. But that's there. So there's another, yeah, and the flow they permitted it for was 230,000 gallons a day into that spray field. Whether they'll permit that same exact amount, I believe they will. There's some other things that have to be addressed to do that.
Jim, I have one question.
Sure.
Just on the service and the 3M reuse contract, why would we want to give that up when we have revenue from that? And I understand that, you know, that we still have quite a bit of capacity on our old plant for reuse. Is that correct?
Until the Sanford project is implemented, at which point your plant is repurposed for equalization and pumping to Sanford. It's not purposed for treatment anymore. So you won't be generating reclaimed water out of that plant once Sanford goes online and the plant is modified to do that. So there would need to be a source of reclaimed water to continue the 3M contract. Now, I just want to divorce the servicing from the financial aspect. So service can be provided from the new decentralized plant. How the administrative paper is modified, tweaked, you know, how the financial revenue travels is all on the table, right? So you're not really giving it up. It's still there, and some of those details then would need to be negotiated.
So there's, I think, maybe 2 points to that, and I don't know whether Carl and Charles would get into that, or whether you get into that, or what. There is, I understand that there's still a physical need to get water reclaimed water to 3M through the repurposed facility somehow. It would still, our repurposed facility would still have a role in getting that water there. So there's that, number one. And then number two, I think what you're saying, as far as the value, we wouldn't necessarily as a town need to agree to give up the value that's in that 3M agreement. Correct.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it becomes a source, a sink for the effluent from this plant. It becomes a place to put the water. Plant being built anyway to service the wastewater that has to come to the plant. So assuming those charges are carried in the plant, there's no reason for the reuse revenue necessarily to be needed, so to speak. And all of that kind of stuff is negotiable, right? Those are all the details. And you mentioned the other details about there are some interconnection details at the plant to work out, both for a discharge and, again, for continuing the reuse water on to 3M. Theoretically, by continuing to use the facilities that do that right now at the plant, and also whatever interconnections would be necessary once raw wastewater is coming to that plant from Chatham Park and needs to go on to Sanford. So those are all details that would be worked out during the design of the plant project when Wooten is working on that and would collaborate about that. Does that make sense?
But when we put in our application last year with the state for the loan and the PER that has followed, my understanding is that it was for the reworking, not the mothballing or not the turning it into a headworks or whatever the expression is. My understanding was that it was going to be a substantive addition to the plant or a substantive rework of some of the older materials, which in one change, horses in the middle of that.
I think there is, and I think I'm stepping on their part of this now, and either they should jump in or we should, if possible, wait till we get on.
Mayor, that's going to be covered completely in our presentation. You are correct. The alternative that was presented was most beneficial at that time. Things have changed since that, and that's what we're going to describe to you. But it did. That alternative 2 that we showed was forced maintenance effort and continued use of treatment of the full components of the wood. And we'll describe that later.
So Tim, I hate to do this, but I think you're making a really important point, and I'm not understanding it.
Okay.
And it's the 0.75 MGD at the existing plant, the 1.249 discharge permit, and how the construction of a new 250,000 gallon per day plant allows you to allocate paper flow in excess of what's actually being treated?
Again, and Charlie talked a little bit about this distinction between an 80-90 rule and an allocation tracking that the state does. So yes, if all you had was the plan, which right now is all you had, there were no other plans in place to do anything to it that are established, approved, and ready to go, then the 750 is all that's being looked at by the state, whether it's the 80-90 rule or the allocation. So they'll let you allocate, they'll look at how much flow goes into the plant, and whatever margin you have on top of that to get up to your 750, that's what's allocatable, right? And then they've got those rules in place that when that actual flow hits 80, you've got to be in planning, which you are, and at 90, you've got to be ready for construction or in construction, which you will be at some point soon. Okay. And that lets you, again, continue to put flow into the plant. But if you have, and this has happened before, maybe not everywhere, but it's happened to us, and Mike, you might jump in too and confirm that with some of yours, is if you have an existing plant and you have a permitted expansion of that plant, it's already designed, it's gone through the state, whoever had to say grace has said grace, all you have to do is put it out to bid and build it. They will let you allocate against that amount as well.
Okay.
So if we have a 250 plant on the ground and another 250 permitted expansion ready to go, all we need is bricks and mortar, the allocatable total amount of flow plus allocated flow is 500 now.
Got it.
Does that make more sense the way I said it?
I got it.
So that expands our paper capacity, and in the event that we actually build both in Chatham Park and in Old Town of Pittsburgh additional businesses or residences to generate additional flow of wastewater, what happens when the small street plant exceeds that 100% of capacity?
Again, we'll be at that sort of a pseudo 80-90 kind of rule. So when we get to 80%, state's going to call, or I'm going to call, and the state's going to say, well, you're at 80, we know you've got this permitted expansion, so you've planned for it, you've designed for it. Just don't lose track of all the flow that's coming to the plant, guys. When we get to 90%, they're going to say, or even at that point, they're going to say, you know, what's your pace of growth, and how much is already paper allocated, and how fast can you build this plant? And at some point, before they tell us, we're going to say, we're going to have to build this plant now because we know flow is going to come in the door before we're ready to shed it to Sanford.
Mhm.
Now, if we know we're going to be ready to shed it for Sanford, that's going to be the answer to the state, is that, well, yeah, Sanford's going to be ready in 3 months. We're not going to get another 50,000 gallons a day coming in the door in the next 3 months.
Mhm.
So, and then that allocation becomes allocated to Sanford at that point, or stays allocated for the plant. It could stay that way, it's just, well, we'll never get there anyway until we're ready to expand that plant. So does that make sense?
Yeah, but I just want to make sure that I'm really clear that our old town plant can exceed the 80%, can exceed the 90%, so long as we're dotting all the i's and crossing all the t's. We're under construction presumably on Eubank Street, and under construction to Sanford, and we hit 90% for a whole year, we're still fine. And what happens when we exceed 100% of capacity?
Well, if you ever put more than 750 into the creek, now you've got a problem, because that's all you're permitted
That's
to do
violation.
through that plant. Yes, then you've got a problem. So, if that were to happen, let's just play along with it, that the growth happens elsewhere in the town faster, at a faster pace than expected over the next 2 to 3 years. But it hasn't at the decentralized, and there's capacity there, so the flow could be wheeled around through the system to get to the decentralized.
Okay. And Mr. Kruzbeck, is that the kind of emergency that you have in mind when you've said that you would have discussions or arrangements hypothetically with EnviroLink for energy emergency flows?
I didn't catch all of what Tim said as far as that last answer goes, but yeah, there's no easy answer to that solution. I think if we go over the flow, it's an extreme situation, or we go over the permitted capacity, it's an extreme situation that would cause us to discharge. We would have to have other plans in place. If we didn't have other plans in place, then we would have to pay fines, which is kind of what we're doing right now. But I think the intention ultimately would be, when everything's up and running, to have more safeguards in place. In this situation, I think we wouldn't have the ability at that point in time to deal with an extreme situation. We would be challenged, I think, because we wouldn't have the wherewithal, we wouldn't have the total infrastructure capacity to deal with it at that point in time, at least as I understand it.
Well, I guess it depends on the degree you're talking about. If all of a sudden, 2 million gallons appears, and we have, 250 at decentralized and 750 in town, and that happens for an entire month, then yeah, you're cutting them about that. But if you're at, 770 in town, and we're at 100 at the decentralized, and there's an interconnection that can be bidirectional, then that extra 20 could be moved up to the plant. It doesn't go through your plant at all. Raw wastewater goes up to the decentralized plant. You're never in violation.
I think you and I had talked one time about building in some safeguards, with the plant. I think in the future, and making some interconnections in the future. And yeah, I think as we move forward, that's something we need to explore.
Because there's going to have to be, the way the system is configured, there is a raw wastewater force main going from near that plant. It's basically, there's a regional pump station at the intersection of Chatham Parkway and 64 Business. So just to the west of the treatment plant, the decentralized plant. So there will be, through this station, it would pump raw wastewater to this plant, and clean water comes back out of the plant to the discharge point and out for use. And also out of this regional station, raw wastewater comes over to the vicinity of the plant where it joins up with the other town flow and heads to Sanford. Okay, so there's already an interconnection. What there isn't right now, at least on paper and on the ground, is the pump station at the town's plant that pumps it backwards. Using this line, rather than sending raw wastewater this way, it sends raw wastewater back that way. It's just a matter of a small pump station for whatever amount we think it would need to handle.
So, related to the 100% question, we reach 100%. We've gone to 120% before during last Christmas when it rained buckets. And we went over 1 million gallons a day at the plant. So there's an operational procedure to meet the excess flow in place. You know, you have to change some activity at the plant, you report it, but if you look at the data over time, when the spikes hit, it's temporary and it's very quick. It goes up, then it goes down. And so there's emergencies over 0.75 do occur, they'll always occur. This is wet weather, and we only have equalization basis for a certain amount. So when they do occur and we exceed 100%, we have procedures in place to manage it. You know, you have to report, you have to stop going through the sand filter, you have to change the pumping mechanism, but the staff is set up to go over 0.75. And knowing full well that it's not a permanent number, it just goes right back down again as soon as the cloud spigot shuts off.
And I'll just say this, and that's probably too bold of a statement, but I'm prone to it anyway. Mike, you can tell me I'm wrong or tell me I'm right, because you've worked for the state and you've run 40 different systems. I don't believe I have ever seen the state come in and slap anybody for 1 month of exceedance when they've got another project in place, or 2 other projects underway, on track, ready to be complete at some point, and this is a spike and a blip because of a wet weather event. It's not mismanagement, it's not chronic. I can never say never, because I can never control what happens, you know, in the places at the state, but I'd be extremely surprised to see any kind of an NOV or an enforcement action for that.
Okay.
You do it for 12 straight months and you blow them off and you're not working on anything, yeah, you're going to see enforcement. Mike?
I'll just add to that, in order for you to go non-compliant at the plant at 750, you'd have to be over 750, to put it kind of the way Charles is, for almost a whole month. Okay, so it's a monthly average flow that they compare you with. So those spikes that go above, as long as your average stays below that, you're okay.
Just to add on to that, and hopefully not to confuse the discussion or add anything to it, but just so we're clear about the 90%, in reality, any treatment facilities out there never gets to operate at 100%. It is physically impossible for it to be permitted for it to have an average day capacity at its permitted capacity. So to put that in terms, 0.75, the state would not allow us to run on average day in, day out, 0.75. The 90% rule is put in that once you hit that threshold, your next step that you've already planned when you hit 80 has to be implemented. All right? It's such that it is in place, up and operational, such that whatever you have permitted never hits that threshold. Now, what Fred was talking about, the other thing to keep in mind, to make sure that we're clear, our plant, Pittsburgh's plant, is 0.75, but it has the ability to have a peak event capacity of 2.5 times that 0.75. And that number is about 1.8 MGD. All right, all plants typically have a minimum of a peaking factor. So I just want to get clear, when we're talking about 80, 90, we're talking about average daily flows. The facilities have the ability to handle peak flows. They're totally different entities on the scale. But in reality, we never really talk about 100% operating at 100% of what you're permitted, because it's just not possible. I mean, now, you may exceed your average day flow from an event, and that creates a violation. But when you're talking about consistent 12 months, once you're at 90%, the safeguards are in place that prevent you from ever hitting that, if that makes sense. So we talk about our plan, that's why we always look at to make sure you got more capacity, you know, out looking forward than what you need, because you never really hit. You know, if it's 1.5, 2, 4 MGD, once you get close to that, you're always moving to the next step. So I hope that makes a little clarity.
I was wondering if we're currently being fined. Brian, please.
We had a year or 2 ago, we had a $500 fine or something like that.
And it seems like there are 2 we's here. We, the town of Pittsburgh, and we, the decentralized plant that is going to be built by Chatham Park. Is that a different we than the we?
No, and that's, I'm glad you brought that up, because I almost said something some time ago about that too in the conversation, is somehow getting the paradigm in place that there's no us and them, there's just us. This is the town. Everybody, unless you decide to do something different, everybody that's sending flow to either one of these plants is a town resident, town member, you know, and all that. And so this is a joint, total town effort. Now there are various people and players and actors, you know, helping to move those things along, right, and working together. But at the beginning of the day and the end of the day, it's all the town.
Yeah.
So.
But it is a population and a collection of businesses and business owners and voters and ratepayers, and so there is a distinction, a palpable distinction between current sewer ratepayers and expected and anticipated, eagerly anticipated future sewer ratepayers in Chatham Park and elsewhere. And I guess what I would like to hear is, I think I'm hearing you, Mr. Baldwin, very clearly now, and we've gone over about 3 times, that the process of the projects for the Sanford Force Main and the DCWRF, I'll call it Eubanks plant, both of those in planning give us flexibility on the 80% rule. Once they begin construction, they give us flexibility on the 90% rule. Am I reiterating that correctly?
Yes, when you hit 90, the state wants to see you at that stage of the game. So yeah, I guess by definition we'd say that.
So all of that is good on paper and to stay legal and all of that. I would just like to see assurance that we're making efforts, Mr. Grusbeck, to ensure that we don't have any physical constraints on development in the older part of town at that point when either or both the Eubanks plant and the Sanford Force Main are under construction.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's part of the goal. I think in getting this capacity expanded, and as Mr. Baldwin indicated, it would be available to not just Chatham Park, to use that term, but to projects that are here.
Yeah, absolutely, because the whole boat floats higher or the whole boat takes on water when you get momentum and traction and things are happening, and then you have to pull the reins back and slow it down or stop it. Getting traction again takes time, and people suffer from that, everyone, town and everyone. So yes, I totally agree. That's one of the goals, is move all these things as fast as possible, as orderly as possible, and stay ahead of that. Keep your eye on the ball.
So at what point will we be able to have some leeway and some flexibility? Let's say if we have an applicant for sewer interconnection on East Street at the old Ford dealership.
As close as you are, and again, Charlie, you'll have an opinion as well, I think, as close as you are on the flow at your plant, I don't think we're going to get to allocate against the decentralized plant while it's only in construction. There's nothing on the ground at all. I think the 250 plant would have to be on the ground, and then we'd allocate against the full 500 at that point. But I think that's when the relief is. So I think until that point, you're probably still a little restricted for now. And that's, again, why we're trying to get that plant by early 18, as early as possible. I don't, that sort of restricts some of the allocation, sure. If somebody comes in for $300,000, I mean, we would certainly go to bat for that with the state. Plan, especially if the plant's in construction, we have a contract, we're on schedule, we have a date certain as you can be. We would all go to the state and if we can demonstrate or have an agreement with that developer, whoever wanted that much flow, that says, well, that's fine. I'm just trying to get lots allocated right now. I'm not going to have anybody flushing toilets in 8 months.
Right.
If I do, I'm going to have 12 people. It's not much flow. And I think we could make that argument if we find a willing ear at the state. There have been willing ears, people change and people retire and all that, but so far, we've had very good receptions, all of us, I think, at the state, on everything we're doing.
But you see, the essence of his concern is that we have a certain amount of power over what happens within our old town, we'll call it, by virtue of what it is we pass on a monthly basis as far as new developments are concerned. We don't have that sense of control over what's happening at Chatham Park because the master plan has been approved. The small area plans, once they start coming online and being approved, it could result in 2 teaspoons, or it could result in 200,000 gallons.
Well, and maybe there's other people in the room that would comment to that, because that's still not the last gate to go through to have a building permit and a CO for anything, right? There's still checks and gates that the town controls. Somebody tell me I'm wrong about that, but I don't believe that the simple small area plan opens the floodgates unrestricted. You still got to approve designs and subdivision plans and everything else.
And I still think the town's tracking the sewers capacity of the plants and issuing allocation, just like any other development. So.
The allocation would be used for the redevelopment that's happening in Chatham Park. If somebody puts for a look to start something that may not be
Well, it will be a first come, first serve, as I think it is today, as it should be.
Yeah.
So
I create a divide in the town where one is flourishing and Old Pittsburgh is stagnant. I don't know what to do about that, but hopefully it'll all work out. That's just a concern.
I agree.
But I don't see how sewer allocation affects that, because that would imply that sewer is being allocated to the thriving portion and the demands of the portion of the town not thriving, the allocation's not being granted in some way, shape, or form when it is being granted here. If folks want to make investments and do development in their sewer capacity, it goes to the person who gets in line and says, I want it.
Right. I just hope it'll be left, for people who aren't already in line.
And that's the challenge, to make all these paper allocations come into play as soon as possible, whether it's DCF, whether it's Sanford, whether it's both. The sooner that happens, the sooner those artificial constraints go away.
I have a question. Reference to the paper allocations. Were you saying that you can allocate, and you can just, if you would just repeat that, up to 250 if you have their permit and there's a plant in process? So are all these paper allocations with nothing? Would that be paper allocation only?
Yes, I'll say it again in a little bit different way, or say something else a different way. Again, when I think it's probably a little bit of a tough sell to allocate against the decentralized plant, the 250 or the 500, while it is still just a plant on paper, that it's not built yet. I think while it's built, there's an argument to be made that there is some degree of confidence that this other thing you want to allocate to get you over your 750, and you need to allocate it against the decentralized plant, that there's an argument to make if it's virtually a mortal lock that the plant will be done and built before those houses are built and flushing toilets, and we go down to the state and make that argument. Once the plant is actually built, that 250, then allocating against the full 500 is achievable and doable at that point. So it's that first little bit, it's the period between now and early 2018 that's the tricky part. If allocations requests pick up steam and you have nothing to allocate them against because the plant's already fully allocated. That's the tricky part, is how soon can we get the state to agree to let us allocate against the new decentralized plant.
Even though it's not totally
it's not built yet. Okay. But if you got, somebody comes in with a 300,000, let's even 100,000 gallons a day, that's a lot of houses. That's what 500 houses. Not building 500 houses in 9 months. If this comes in the middle of next year, in June of 17, and we're 9 months from completion on a project that's in construction, I don't know how the state can look at us in the eye and say, well, we're worried those 500 houses will be flushing toilets before next March, right?
In good faith, that it's going.
I think so, and so far, as I said, we've had really good relationships at the state, and you guys have too, and they've been very reasonable with us and tried to help. There's a lot of people that want to help this whole situation.
I mean, the state of North Carolina wants it to grow. They want.
Yes.
I just want to be definitely clear about that.
Right now, again, I don't make their decisions for them. When
But I
I'm
mean,
kidding, I'll do it my
that's
way, but until then, I think we've got a reasonable argument to make.
And they've got experience doing this. I know about how the timetables tend to work, so it makes sense.
You referenced earlier the idea that you had taken, that the town had taken part of our Haw River allocation and moved it over to Robertson Creek. Given the idea that we have 1.97 MGDs now remaining unused in this scenario, is there any chance that more could be moved over to Robertson Creek? Because nobody wants to put anything in the Jordan Lake and make it any worse than it already is.
No, I think that's going to be a really tough sell. I mean, I'll never say never, and I love tilting at windmills sometimes, but the problem is, Roberson has issues too, especially down near the confluence of the river and the lake. It's 303D listed. There's nutrient issues, and that's why actually the nutrient limitations into Roberson are much more stringent than the Haw River. And so asking them to let you put more phosphorus into Roberson beyond the current flow, I don't think you get a very warm reception anyways on that. Part of the issue, I think, was they were worried about base flow for aquatic habitat and all that. So a little extra flow they thought was a good thing, but there are limits to that. So I wouldn't say never. I wouldn't say you lose too much by asking the question. Just maintain some credibility and manage your expectations pretty low, I think. Make sense? Okay.
Well, Tim, this is a question that has come to my mind knowing the issue with Robeson. And so if we take the water that's presently going into Robeson via the treatment plant, stop that flow, and start pumping it to Sanford, do we have an issue with not enough water in Robeson?
Yes. I think you have an issue of loss of habitat. If you totally stopped at that creek doesn't have a lot of natural flow at various times of the year. That was part of the thinking, I think, that supported the move and the change. The other thing, I'm not sure if that's true.
I don't know if that's true. I don't think that's true. I don't know if that's true. When we got the process going for Robeson, that point 499, I actually wrote the letter to USGS to make the initial 7Q10 finding and all that, which is a flow. And they never had an issue of it being too oversensitive to drought. In other words, it always had a nice base flow in it. And so it wasn't that big of a concern for the state. It's been several years, so I can't remember the details. I have all the files, but I think the issue was they were worried about additional phosphorus, and they weren't concerned about habitat degradation at that point. They felt like the additional flow would not degrade the habitat further. But it was initially called a zero flow stream, which has a definition I can't remember right this moment, below a certain flow. But it was all about phosphorus. And so the permit let additional phosphorus go in based on the amount of phosphorus our plant very efficiently removes from the stream. So the actual phosphorus in pounds per year was extremely low with the additional permit. That was my understanding of how all that worked out.
And I think they still have that view, now, that phosphorus is the main issue.
Oh, clearly it is.
If you stop discharging, if you cut the flow off to the creek, it's almost a better option because you're not putting the phosphorus in the creek.
Right.
If you went from
the .75 now down to 250,000, you're actually you could be lowering that phosphorus load, and based on my conversations with some of the MPS people, they've indicated that that would be a favorable thing in their minds.
The issue, and I totally agree with everything you said. I wasn't in those meetings, but I can imagine them going exactly that way because the USGS and the NPDS guys think about different things than Fish and Wildlife does and some of the other environmentalists, because I tell you, I've had conversations as much as 8 years ago that the environmental groups like the idea of augmenting the stream banks for stream bank restoration with reclaimed water, and the DWQ guys shot it down because they didn't want to have to deal with crossing borders between stormwater and wastewater and deal with Atlanta to do that. But the environmentalists were on board with that. But they don't control the MPDS process. So yes,
two different groups talking.
I think we could probably populate an argument in a full room, but we don't want to do that.
I got a question.
Sure.
So early on, you were talking about the flows, into Robeson Creek, and currently we treat tertiary treated water, and we send 50,000 gallons a day roughly to 3M if they need it. One of the discussions in the past always was, how do you make that a permanent solution? And we always were told that you had to have a 30-day solution for the amount of water we are sending to 3M in order to count, have it count, essentially, that we take it out of Robeson Creek, it doesn't count against our 750. Is that still the case? The implication was we would have to have a pond or somewhere to spray it.
Yeah, because right now their view is they want to see that you have control over disposing of that amount of flow. Even, it's fine if it's equalized and released more or less different times of the year, stored up and all that, but they're still going to want to see that there is some degree of control and confidence that they will take it, even if it is over a quarterly average or an annual average. And so you'd have to have a contract vehicle that looked enforceable to them, that they were confident you will in fact get 50,000 a day, at least on average over there, and you have the equalization or storage to shade the peaks and fill in the valleys. Right?
It's still the same situation. So when the commissioners were asking you the question and the mayor about what happens if you get over 750 or you have an issue where you're pushing the 100%, if you're sending a percentage of it to 3M, presumably, and or you're going to send it even if they're not running their lines, and you have a place to take it in this whole planning process, that would ameliorate the problem.
But right now, they're just looking at the actual discharge flow, right? I mean, Mike, I think you were raising your hand. I'm not sure if you were or somebody else was. No? Okay, come on. So it sort of comes out in the wash anyway if you're monitoring what's being discharged to the creek. You've already split that off and sent it somewhere, whether it's 3M or Timbuktu. So you've already gotten credit for that, essentially. You just haven't put it on paper.
So it's going to be very hard to bump up against that max because you're already sending it, presumably you're sending it over there. The other question I had was, when you're talking about the paper flow and the allocation, you're using the numbers of 120 gallons per bedroom or whatever you're using for the use, that they provide in the code. But if someone comes in and monitors how much they know they're going to use, like, for example, the Belmont Point Apartments that was just built up at Lowe's, we know exactly how much they use. They're filled. We know they use about 4,500 gallons a day. They don't use 20,000 gallons a day, and there's only one manhole it goes to, and there's a master meter for water, so you know exactly what the use is. Couldn't you be permitting with the state and say, we actually know the use of these things, and we don't need to be allocating 5 times the amount, and would that actually help the town actually be in a better position to plan? As opposed to being in this weird paper situation where we're always bumping against this max?
And the answer is yes and no.
Okay.
Because technically,
that's
yes.
great engineering.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've got a chip on both red and black. Yeah. You could go to the state and ask for a flow reduction request in the per capita flow and your allocations and all that. But the way the state does that with an existing system is they will look at your actual daily records, and there's a formula for your maximum flows over a certain number of days and that average, and that's what they use to calculate it. In a system that has a lot of I&I problem, you have virtually no chance to get a significant flow reduction until that's brought back under control. You may qualify for some. We haven't run the numbers. I don't know, Becky, if you have.
But why would you ask someone coming in the front door to need so much more when you know exactly what it's going to be?
Well, and this is the next part of the question. That was the no part. Here's the yes part. There are newer systems or new developments that have gotten flow reduction requests up front. And Mike maybe will speak to this, but he owns and operates Briar Chapel here in the county. Day one, they got a flow reduction approved for 250 gallons per 3-bedroom house as opposed to 360 that's in the code. They have recently gotten another reduction based on empirical data in that development, and they're down below 200 gallons per house. They're like 56 gallons a bedroom. Chatham Park, at least, will have at least as much water efficiency measures in place as Briar Chapel does, I think more, certainly pushing for more. And so we're expecting to get a flow reduction approved, at least in Chatham Park, in greater Chatham Park, and what that would then have to be allocated, how that would be allocated. Whether you can get that, bits and pieces, an apartment complex or something like that in the context of an already existing town, that's a tougher sell. I'm not sure that's ever been done. But
so having a reuse pipe in place in Chatham Park seems like it would be useful for doing just what you said, that to reduce.
Well, it does and it doesn't, because they're looking at how much wastewater is generated, right? So the reuse is already taking the wastewater that was generated and then repurposing it. So that doesn't reduce how much wastewater is generated. It does reduce the potable water usage, however, if you use it for toilet flushing, irrigation, et cetera, et cetera. So it could help making the argument to public water supply section on an allocation number on the water side. Those guys are a little more rigid than the sewer guys. They're not as friendly about those things, but there's a good argument to make there too. Yes.
So earlier you just tossed off hypothetical 500 houses, 100 gallons per day. Or was it 100,000?
100,000, so 200 gallons per house if it was an efficient house.
And did that take into consideration that kind of modern equipment and modern efficiency levels?
Yeah, I just did it to make math easy for my little pea brain up here so I could divide numbers easier.
Okay, well, but what in your experience is modern new build, highest efficiency?
Like I said, Briar Chapel is operating right now at less than 200. Approved with a study.
So what is the toilets that have less water in them, and what are the things?
Everything, low flow fixtures, much less water. I mean, there's a much, and I think this exists everywhere, not just in the newer places. But there's a different mindset on conservation and such that's being promoted. I don't know if they have it or not, but this development, I believe, will have smart meters and that sort of real-time conservation signal that goes to the customer. Get your bill 2 months. After you use the water doesn't really help you save water. Just knowing today what you used helps modify behavior. So
that seems like if this is going to be an issue in the next few years, that we need to think about having some incentives in our UDO and write that to encourage people to use these kind of devices, which is a good thing anyway. But that might be something that we want to put in our UDO that strongly encourages people to take those kind of measures.
Yeah, and on the water side, I believe all of the buildings in Chatham Park will be dual plumb. So right now, the rules are in place to do toilet flushing in commercial, institutional. Someday, we will have rules approved to do it in residential settings as well. And that will at least cut down the potable water use. It will still generate wastewater, but at least you're recycling it. Yes, sir.
I just want to follow up on that comment. So we have a draft water efficiency ordinance, and that's coming before you soon. So that would do just that.
And so we might be able to do the same thing as some developments get the water out.
And Beth, you already have developments in town that are that efficient. You live in one. John and I live in one. I mean, Chatham Forest only does about 25,000 gallons a day, and our allocation was 72. And there's 3 people in my household, and we're at 100 gallons a day. I mean, we don't water the lawn with them, but I mean, we have been monitoring this since the get-go. So the bigger problem the town has in the old part of the town, where we have the issue with the old infrastructure, but you're going to find most of these places built in the last 15 years use 1.6 gallon toilets. All the things he's talking about, we don't have that problem. It's in the older parts. unfortunately.
Do we get credit for that? I mean, has that changed?
Well, no, it's a tributary credit. When they talk about paper flow, eventually they wiped away our 72,000 gallons and said, okay, we're only draining 24,000 gallons that shows up at the plant. That's what they mean between tributary and paper.
That's what I was going to say. Eventually, it'll come out in the wash. It just takes time for it to both build and then have a track record established where your plant flow went down. Right.
In reading the McGill report, which granted this a few years ago, they said that water decisions need to be made along with and in conjunction with wastewater decisions. I guess my question is, are we doing that?
That's another yes and no probably, and maybe needs some other people chime in, but yes. I mean, all of the planning that has been done, I think, is cognizant of the fact that eventually, sooner rather than later, you'll be challenged for water supply as well. Right now, wastewater is the more critical item and closer to the edge, right? But again, by putting a complete reclaimed water system throughout Chatham Park, by putting toilet plumbing, dual plumbing, by requiring that to be done, etc., it's at least laying the groundwork to use less water and need to get less of an expansion or an allocation down the road. And at the same time, you're working on getting additional allocation through the Jordan partners, thinking about at least an expansion at your water plant, in the coming time. Whether that's before the Jordan partners or not, depends on the pace of growth, but probably is before. There's talk of going from 2 to 4.
Or interconnections.
And interconnections and stuff. But yeah, I think this is a paradigm and a mindset that has taken root in this community and a lot of places and in people, is this whole conservation issue, is doing more with less in the water side. And to do that, yes, you have to look at the whole water regime, everything, and again, stop treating it like a McDonald's. This is not a disposable commodity of water. It's a reusable, recyclable, a one-pass disposable ethic needs to be passé. You're going to run out of water at some point.
So actually, it brings me to the question, I was going to save it for later, but might as well. What is the difference between the water that we discharge into the creek and reuse water?
There's quite little difference, but actually the treatment efficiency, the levels of treatment for certain parameters that will enable discharge are going to be more stringent than reuse. Largely, as you mentioned, the phosphorus. The reuse rules don't require that kind of stringent phosphorus removal or total nitrogen removal and conversion from ammonia through nitrates and into nitrogen gas. So there are actually more liberal limits for reuse, except in the disinfection arena. There are certain, depending on what you use it for, there are certain tests for disinfection that are more stringent than the discharges right now, because they test for other organisms that aren't tested for in a regular discharge. So there's a little more stringent and a little more flexible, but by and large, certainly to the untrained naked eye, any measure, they're equivalent. So the only major difference we're going to treat all the water as high as we have to for both cases. So it'll be the worst case scenario for both defection and nutrients. The one difference is, for discharge, you do not want chlorine in the water. There's a maximum chlorine residual for a discharge, very, very, like micrograms per liter, very, very low. So we don't want to chlorinate what is discharged, but you do want to maintain a chlorine residual in a reuse system to prevent any regrowth or that kind of thing. So what goes into reclaimed would be chlorinated, what goes into the creek will not be chlorinated. That's the only difference. Sorry for getting technical again.
It's very, very good.
As long as you don't mind explaining things over there.
It's complicated. Let's see where we go. On this chart, the only thing we really hadn't talked about, excuse me. Sorry, getting a little dizzy.
Okay. Well, Some folks think that we should continue, and I'm thinking about people that come a long distance, or, well, let's all get back together and ask the question.
Not necessarily.
The tanks won't overflow.
This next one's wine choice.
Well, as Jay put it, we know that Tim Baldwin is in good hands now. I don't know if everybody, how the board would feel, how the audience would feel about continuing. It is 8 o'clock, but since we are here, if there's anyone that's traveling long distance and wishes to take up the next portion of it, how does the board feel about continuing?
I'm okay with continuing.
I feel like it's so hard to get us all scheduled in one place, but Commissioner Baldwin, I appreciate your sentiments that you're not all that interested in continuing.
I wasn't, but, whatever fellow board members want to do. Thank you, sir.
Well, it sounds like there's a consensus to go forward without a formalized vote, which I don't think we are doing in this context. So, would you like to?
Yeah, that's okay. Well, I'm Carl with Wooten Company. You might remember me from about a year ago. We were talking about this project and the what we call the engineering report and environmental information document. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that report. We submitted that report and it's come back, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what the results of that were. And then when I get to a certain point where we talk about more of the design features, I'm going to invite Charlie to come up and talk. So I'll go ahead and get started. if you have our handout, I'm just starting on this first parts of project overview if you'd like to follow along. It was back in September of 2015 that we had a workshop similar to this, and then the following week or 2 weeks, there was a resolution by this board to go ahead and submit to approve a certain alternative, which was called Alternative 2 at the time, and then just go ahead and submit for clean water loan funding to fund the project. So going on that, we went ahead and we prepared an engineering report and an environmental information document. That's what ER-EID stands for, if you hear that acronym. The ER portion, the engineering report, is like the technical engineering part of the report. The EID is the environmental information document. That's more the environmental effects of whatever alternative you choose to do is looked at in the environmental information document. So within that same report that we submitted, there was a part that was a technical part. This is what we're going to do. This is what we plan to do. And then the second part is this is the effect on the environment. And then you submit that into what you call a DWI, which is a Division of Water Infrastructure. They're part of DEQ, the larger DEQ regulatory agency, and they specifically are involved with the loan, the funding portion of the projects. In order to continue on the funding track, you have to have this ER-EID approved by them to go forward with the project and get the funding eventually. So that's why this report is important. We submitted in February of this last year, at the end of February, and then four months later, the DWI, they responded with some comments on our report. In that report, we were recommending Alternative 2, which was pump to Sanford and then operate the wastewater treatment plant at existing capacity. As we've talked, there's been some changes since then, and we're switching to a different alternative at this point. Some of the comments on the original environmental report, they had some questions about our populations and flow adjustments. They were looking for a particular importance, what they call the peak day and the peak hour. And the importance of the peak day is, and I'll get into a little more, is the equalization capacity, which they have right now at the plant. But we went through that. We had some discussions with them. They also brought up the idea of interbasin transfer, and that is related to pumping to Sanford. And we went through a little discussion to iron out what are the exact limits. Typically, the 2 million gallons a day is the average monthly flow that you can pump over to Sanford. So that's 2 million gallons. 3 million gallons is, we talk about these rain events and storm events or peaking events. The IVT allows you to pump an extra 1 million gallons per day over Sanford. So that's what the importance of the IVT transfer. And at this point, one of the reasons we're phasing the project is because you can't go past that limit unless you go through a long regulatory approval process, about 3 to 5 years. So one of the reasons to phase a project is because of that limitation on the regulations. And one of the larger comments, or one of the more things that they commented about, was that before they do a final approval on this report and approve you to go forward with the project, they want to see at least a draft agreement that the town's going to have with Sanford to accept the wastewater, and that if there's some financial arrangements made with Chatham Park, they want to at least see what the plans are for that to help fund the project.
Carl, can I ask a question on the interbasin transfer? So it's 2 million gallons per day over the average month, or a month?
Yeah, it's on a monthly, or basically on a year. No, 2 million gallons per day, average month basis.
Okay. And then that 3 million gallon peak, is that over a month period as well?
No, that's a daily.
1 day.
That's a daily peak.
Okay.
You can't pump more than that in 1 day over.
Got it. Okay.
And basically, if you have some days that are over 3 and you have other ones that are under the 2, you can average out.
Okay.
So that's the limitation that we have. Now, one little difference in Alternative 2, we have the same pumping station in both cases. We haven't changed anything. We're not doing anything different with the pumping station in Sanford. It's pretty much the same thing. It's a little bit different in terms of the capacity. Once we found out that we can go up to the 3 million gallons per day, we pushed that capacity up a little bit. And I'll get into that a little bit more as I go through here. We submitted, we looked at some of the DEQ comments and we submitted some comments back, and then we had a couple of meetings with them to iron out, to make sure that we're all on the same page of what we need to do to help move this process along and get this EID approved. And we talked a little bit about changing the alternative in those meetings. So they are aware of what we're talking about here. They're on board to do it at this point. So it's a matter of getting the paperwork done, getting the report revised, and submitting it. And we've initiated monthly meetings with that, so every month we're going to be meeting with the DWI regulators to say what's the progress on what we're doing here. So that's the last piece of it. As part of that, I mentioned they had some questions about flows and populations, and I'm not going to get into all the details about it, but the next page on your handout says projections, and we project to year 2035 because that's the requirement of the loan period. DWI is you've got the intent, you've got the money now, the intent of the fund is there, and it's for a 20-year period, so you have to look out 20 years and everything in this report. So that's why it's year 2035. We had split the population summary into what's coming into Pittsboro and ETJ area versus Chatham Park. We've gotten agreement from them on these population projections, so we're moving forward. What's more important on these wastewater flows? I just want to. We've got them split into the Pittsboro and ETJ areas, which is everything within the town limits and everything inside your ETJ except for Chatham Park, and then there's Chatham Park wastewater flow. And then the total flow now is 4.41 is the total projected flow at this point. It's a little bit less than before, but in the same ballpark. It was 4.5 before, now it's 4.1. So we're real close in that. To kind of illustrate this graphically, I don't know if I want to use it. I feel kind of strange, but over on this chart here, those population projections I just gave, there's a green line here, and that's the town demand. It's the town, regular town growth within the ETJ and within the town limits. And then the red line is the total wastewater flow generation over time. Now the important thing from here is we've also shown on here, these are what your discharge abilities are right now to the Robeson Creek and to the Haw River. And they total up to 3.22 million gallons per day. So that's an important thing to recognize. If you look at this growth, at one point you're going to get to the point where you're producing more wastewater than you can actually discharge under your existing permit. So your existing permit says 3.22. At some point you're going to get over that. In the 20-year period, it's up to 4.4. So theoretically, if we didn't go to Sanford, you'd have to find somewhere else to discharge to. Okay. So what? Yeah, I'm kind of going ahead a little bit, but when you have the Sanford option, that's like not counted against your permit that you have now. So then you'd have 2 million. That would bump this up to 2 million gallons, and you could go way further out here before you'd be able to utilize all of this and meet the demands further on out. Hopefully that makes clear. So by transferring your water over to Sanford, you also buy some extra. You don't buy extra capacity, but you buy extra time on this line. You're actually, instead of at 3.22, you're at 5.22 collective. So that's the reason we wanted to stay with. One of the big reasons to stay with going with the Sanford, continuing with the pump station to Sanford. It's one of the benefits of going that way. Does that make sense to everybody here? And right now we have, this is the capacity of the plant at the moment, and this is the Robeson capacity is 1.249, so that's a half a million gallons, half a million gallons per day flow difference right here. So right now you're kind of limited here, and you can see we're talking about 2018, 2019, and you'd be bumping up against that, or even earlier with your flows based on those projections.
This is just a quick question, man.
Yeah.
It's quite a ways out, but just to clarify, my understanding is we're not currently discharging into the Haw River.
No, there's no outfall there.
We don't even own the pipe to go there.
Well, yeah, there is no pipe right there right now. It's a future thing that you can do. The permit says you can do this, but you'll have to get We'd have to build it. Yeah, you have to build it and tell them that you're going to do that. And the permit renews every 5 years, so you would be, you could either do it at the renewal time, or you could do what they call a permit modification, which is within, before that 5-year period. If you want to do something differently, you can do a modification application for the permit itself. So, I mean, the big takeaways from that is 4.4 million gallons is your ultimate capacity you're going to need in 20 years, and you can't really get it with the discharge you have right now. So, what we're doing in the alternative is we're changing from what we used to call alternative 2 to now what we call modified alternative 4. The original alternative 4 was just to pump to Sanford and basically what we call decommission the wastewater treatment plant. That is not to demolish everything, but just to shut it off and not use it anymore. The modified alternative 4 is to continue using a portion of the plant. And we're going to be increasing the pumping capacity to 3 MDD because we found out we could do that. We're going to convert the Pittsboro wastewater treatment plant to an equalization function. I don't know how much you can see it here, but right now the wastewater comes in here and you have these 2 equalization tanks here. They're about 600,000 gallons. And the way the plant uses them now is you're treating water. So the way the operators do it now is they collect the wastewater in these equalization tanks on a continual basis because the plant likes to run at a set flow. It doesn't like flows going up and down. The bacteria like it when it's steady. But the problem that occurs is when the big storms come, these tanks will fill up because they don't have enough capacity. So that's the I&I issue we're always talking about. And so right now, one of the limits that you're running against is that these tanks aren't big enough to handle all the flow and not have to bypass some of the process to get it out to the river. So that's kind of a background on what the equalization is about. It's about helping with the storm flows and evening out the flows to the treatment plant. But in this case, in this alternative 4, this modified alternative 4, what we're doing is we're converting these 2 tanks here into equalization volume. So we're stopping treatment at the plant. And there wouldn't be a discharge anymore out to Robeson Creek of treated wastewater from the plant itself, from the Pittsboro plant.
And those 2 equal 500,000?
Which
the 2 circular tanks?
They handle they handle half the flow of the plant, basically, half the treatment capacity of the plant.
Because you've got 1.1 EQ volume.
Right, and the EQ volume is once you convert these, we would convert those to equalization tanks. So you'd have the 600,000 you had before, and those are they have different depths and different sizes, so there's some limitations on it. Those are about 0.5 MDD if you convert both of those. So when you get done with alternative 4, you're going to have 1.1 million gallons of storage, equalization storage, to help you out in these storm events. So that's the purpose of that. Now, once you shut the plant down and don't discharge to the river anymore, the only kind of catch to it all is, well, what do we do with the reuse water supply to 3M? And that's part of the idea where this came about, to divert the water from the water reclamation facility over to the treatment plant, was to help provide not only a potential discharge for that plant, but to provide that reuse water, because the new plant that Chatham Park's, the decentralized plant, is going to treat to a level of the same as reuse, typically just about the same as the reuse level as Tim was talking about. So the only thing that we would, right now, what they do at the treatment plant is they treat all this, it goes through a filter, it goes through an ultraviolet disinfection, and then what they don't discharge out into the river, the water that they pump over to 3M gets chlorinated and then pumped. So there's a chlorination system and a pumping system to pump it over to 3M. That same system would continue to operate under the alternative we're talking about. So you have part of the plant would be still running for this equalization portion, and then the other part would be just to chlorinate and pump water over to 3M to continue that same thing that you've been doing all along. in terms of giving 3M water.
But under this scenario, then the Chatham Park reclaimed water plant is discharging at the current town-operated plant into Robeson.
Correct.
So it's not a zero flow to Robeson.
No, it would be.
Still
It would be whatever that. I mean, now that flow is going to build up. It's not going to be 250,000. You know, when they first open up the plant, it's going to build. So it's going to be whatever they flow send over. It may be zero for a while if it's under the demand that 3M has. So.
Carl, you might also mention just the other key component of the wastewater plant. It'll be the headworks, direct control of that.
Yeah, part of it, and that's the same as what the other alternative was. As it comes in, the influent flow from the sewer, there'll be grit removal and there'll be screening. So the main screenings and grit removal that you're doing just screening right now, but there'll be screening and grit removal before it gets pumped to Sanford. There's basically two reasons for that. One is to keep that stuff out of the force main so it doesn't clog the force main. And the second reason is because Sanford also would require that to be able to pump over to the plant. Because they don't want that stuff in their plant. They want just the nice wastewater that looks like E over there. So, does everybody understand what alternative we're talking about now? Okay. So that's the modified alternative. And that's the alternative that we are going to that we're revising the report for submittal in the future here. There is one difference with this alternative is in the other alternative we were pumping a little less water over to Sanford because we were treating some and pumping on out to, treating some of that flow and putting it out to the Robeson Creek. Well, now we're pumping whatever wastewater is generated over to up to 2 million gallons over to Robeson Creek. And we're going to I'm sorry, what am I saying? Get a little tongue-tied there. Over to Sanford, and then we can go up to 3 MGD over to Sanford. That puts us, the pumping rate that we're going to design for, puts us over a threshold by state regulations due to that larger pump station where we have to do what they call a FONSI, which is a finding of no significant impact of the project. And what that is I was talking about the environmental side before. We had the engineering report, the ER part, and the EID part. Well, that's the EID part. And what that's going to require is just to do some extra, maybe a little bit more field work and look at some what they call cumulative impacts, which are a little closer look into what might happen environmentally on a cumulative basis. But we don't anticipate any problems with that in terms of getting this approved, because most of the force main's underground. And what we have at the treatment plant is we're not disturbing much of the treatment plant grounds, so there's not a whole lot of things that we anticipate any problems with that. I think at this point, I'm going to turn over to Charlie to talk a little bit more about some of the design and engineering aspects of it, and then take us the rest of the way through. Is there any more questions before I let him take over? Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. I do want to take just one step back. If you go, yeah, Ron, thanks. Just to add to what Carl was talking about, really, that Sanford agreement of pumping, I want to get to the second point there. We're wanting to send, or needing to send as much up to that 2 MGD capacity as we can. But really what it gives you, or the town, is negotiation leverage with, the rates of sending that. That really is one of the big factors that have made this modified alternative 4 more attractive, because of that ability to reduce those rates from an operational standpoint. And we're talking about an alternative that has a lesser cost, as you can see there. This alternative is about $1.8 million less than the total cost of the loan that we applied for last September. So there are a lot of factors that are benefits there, but really what's driving it is economic basis that really is going to help, basically the end user, the rate payer. So moving forward, Brian. Carl kind of touched on this, and before I get into the next 2 slides, you know about your facility here in Pittsburgh, but I want to just give you sort of an overview of this. 0.75 MGD facility. The Sanford plant is a 12 MGD facility. Currently, The Pittsburgh plant is flowing at about a little over 500,000 gallons a day. The Sanford plant is flowing about 4 million gallons a day. So they're at about a quarter of their permitted and treatment capability. Just to give you, so when you see some of these maps that I'll show you in a minute, this is where utilities, 2 force mains that come into the Big Buffalo plant in Sanford, are following along this route here. This tank here is a 3 million gallon equalization tank. Initial discussions with Sanford that I'll get into when we talk about the routing is this is a connection point that they had recommended for bringing the force main into their facility. If for some reason that does not work out, the alternative is to bring the main around the backside, or basically the south side of the plant, and this is their headworks area right here. So you're looking at, this is not quite a mile, but it's about 2,000 or 3,000 feet of line, additional line. So we're trying to benefit and save costs by trying to hit this point. But I wanted to just give you an idea of the lay of the land, is we're trying to come in, hit this point, and then that allows them to integrate that flow into the treatment process. That just gives you a little bit of idea on that. But looking at the, and I'll use the pointer. Sorry. Just to go into a little, and I'll be brief on this, but to what Carl was saying, this alternative and what we're recommending, this structure here is that influent screening, drip removal, and new transfer pump station, which is the force main heading over to Sanford. As Carl mentioned, these existing aeration basins and clarifiers, this is the clarifier in the middle, this is the aeration on the outside. Both of these basins would be converted into equalization. So we would supplement the equalization that you have here with these basins, and that gets to the value that what you were seeing on the previous slide. On the back end, or the effluent end of the plant, this line here represents, and it may not be exactly where it's coming into the facility, but this represents the treated effluent coming from the decentralized plant. And it's coming in and integrating into the UV disinfection and basically the reclaimed water pump station component that sends it down to 3M. Okay? So what you're doing is you're utilizing the back component of this facility. We have a new headworks that Carl mentioned about getting screenings and grid out. These bases are being converted. So in essence, the only components of the plant that are being basically taken offline, again, not demolished but taken offline, is the sludge handling capability of the facility, because we won't be generating any sludge from the wastewater process, and the filtration step, because we won't be processing water through here. So the majority of the plant will still remain operational, and we'll have a, the functioning. These will function as heat flows come in. Primarily, this structure will be functioning 24/7. So just to give you an idea, and with this implementation, that'll be functioning 24/7. So it gives you an idea that the majority of the plant, although repurposed, the majority of the components are still going to be in play for use. So we're not demolishing anything, it's just being repurposed. So the other thing that's interesting, and this overall map really doesn't depict it, but Robeson Creek basically flows right around in sort of a U-shape around here. You can see the 100-year flood zone, the floodway, how it already encroaches up into the site. So you can see, and this red line is the property line for the plant. So we have a very tight site. We really don't have any ability to really expand beyond this property without getting outside the boundaries. And this dashed line here represents setbacks. Even in the area that would not be in the flood zone are areas that we cannot build in unless there was a variance granted. Basically, it's a setback of what treatment facilities can be from your property line. So, in essence, one of the things that have driven all these alternatives is you have a lot of limitations at the site, and just because of space and the area that's already been utilized. So that's some of the factor that drives how we've gotten to the alternatives where we are.
Are those setbacks state policy, or is that town ordinance?
State policy. Yeah, it's a regulatory item that any treatment plant or any treatment process 50 feet, and so that's what the boundary. And as you can see, really the only areas that you could really work in, because you can't be in the floodway, really gets you up in this upper area here.
And each of those topo lines is how much?
Topo lines.
topographical lines?
Yeah, no, I'm-
100-year, 500-year flood zone?
This is the 100-year. I don't have those elevations with me. I'm trying to see. It's not really showing up there. But this is the 100-year elevation. This is the 500-year elevation. Trying to see if one of those will show up.
In the bottom right corner, is it written on those lines?
I cannot. I just can't read.
500 years.
They're not typo.
I can't remember what it is.
Yeah, I can't remember. Sorry, but I don't remember the elevations.
That's all right.
I'm sorry, the map is.
So, just one question. This last rain, how close did the creek get up to the plant? Do you know?
I do not know. I have not talked to Randy to get that. John, do you know?
I know it got up to the fence, but I don't know how much further.
Flurry.
Yeah. Which is right around where the 50-foot setback on the left side, right around there. Above there, where the yellow line is, got up there.
Yeah.
So that's the floodway.
You know, when I first heard all this last year, I thought we'd just done a really abysmal job of planning because we put this plant in the floodplain. But now I understand that sewer plants go in floodplains because it's low.
It's the lowest, usually it flows down here.
point in town.
Lowest point.
And so, so even though it sounded like just incredibly poor planning, that there's a rationale for it or not.
Yes, ma'am.
And so are you saying that then that there's no other places as low as this place that we could have?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying in terms of expansion in the parameter of the plant site proper, you're limited there. The expansion would really be outside of that, and it may change from a gravity flow to even a pump flow, depending on where it is. But no, that doesn't limit you to other locations other than this site to build another facility, if that were to happen. Does that answer your question?
Is it fair to assume that if we don't have the sludge operation, that we would reduce odors at this location?
Yes.
Have a couple like that.
Yeah,
I'm thinking
I
the same
think
thing.
all kinds of neighborhoods would like that.
Yeah, typically your odors are generated from the cycling on and off of the aeration, and that's just part of the process because you're trying to thicken it. When that process is not employed, usually you're going to see a reduction in odors.
Okay.
And since we're converting the, I guess those are digester baths, the round ones?
These are here?
Yeah.
These are actually this is the activated sludge portion of it. This is the aeration zone that you currently have is the first process that the wastewater hits after it's screened, and then it goes into the clarification zone where we're taking the solids and settling. Those solids typically are recirculated as part of the process, but then a portion of them are wasted over to this area here. So it's all part of the balance.
So if we're no longer going to be using the digester for collection of the sludge, would that also be suitable for equalization?
It could be looked at, but these facilities here already have pumping and piping and some things that could be more conducive. The other thing that we want to try to focus on once we really get into the detailed design is trying to make any of these changes so it's suitable for this repurposing, but not take it to the extent that it changes the function such that it's going to be such a great extent if we try to put it back online at some future date. So it's going to be that fine balance. So these really are not that conducive, but it can be looked at during the design. I can tell you that these, with the pump station that's sitting here, the piping and how it's already configured, is the most amenable way to approach it.
It's good to hear.
From equalization. So, any other questions on that map? The next slide I want to show you, and this is the same or the similar map that's basically flowing from Pittsburgh down to the Sanford plant. But I want to point out a couple of things for you. The original routing that we looked at was to leave from the treatment plant, follow the existing reclaimed water line that goes out to 3M, up Cornwallis over to 15501, and then heading basically due south along 87th 15501 till we get close to Sanford's plant, and then basically heading due west on that outfall or these force main utility areas right here. That's what you see kind of coming cross country here. The more we've got into this and the further we've developed it, we've looked at a couple of alternatives that we believe is going to offer the town benefits in cost from design, permitting, the whole 9 yards. And that's what's shown in this inset here. Basically, we would still bring the force main from the treatment plant as shown up Cornwallis, and then come around Potterstone Village to the east there's an existing greenway that's paralleling this development here, then extending down and crossing Pittsburgh-Moncure Road. This section here is a portion of Chatham Park's property, and following the utility lines, what we could do is skirt this congested area, this area that has a lot of utilities in a very narrow right-of-way, come around on the south side and actually come to this point, and I know it's hard to see, but about this point right here is right where the right-of-way on 15501 goes from probably about, Becky, what is it, 60 foot wide to like 260 foot wide. And what that gives us is that's exactly where we want to come in, because that gives us plenty of room to locate our utilities along 15501 as we move south.
Can you give us a landmark?
Is it Cabin? What is it? Cabin? Fred, help me.
Log cabin.
Log Cabin Road.
Log
Log Barn. Log Barn. I believe that is Log Barn right here. I think it's right here, sir. I think that's Log Barn. But that alternative is what we're pursuing, and we think that it's going to offer benefits because this area already has many utilities in here, water, sewer, force main. This routing is going to offer a better opportunity for us to get that in. The other area of concern is down here. This is the Petley Group development. It's a small business commercial area. Right as we're getting in, we've crossed the Deep River. This is the Norfolk Southern Railroad, and there's a small commercial area of businesses that are really, if you go through there, it's really close to the road edge. It's hard to see on this map. I don't know if you can see it on your drawing, but what happens is this large right-of-way here that's got these two large white lines, that's the right-of-way. See how it narrows down? It's very, very thin in here. You've got these businesses that encroach on the road. You have a area over here that has it's a mobile home development. And basically, with existing utilities, Sanford has two force mains coming through here and existing water that's through here. It makes it very challenging to find space for us to put an 18-inch force main through that area. So what we've looked at is this is Brown Road right here, coming over on Brown, turning to the west of this little Petley Group property, and then crossing the railroad and then hitting that east-west traveling of utilities that are heading over, and this is Sanford's plant right here. So I hope that, I know that's a large scale, or small map for a large scale, but these two areas, what we're doing here, I think, improves the project, gives us better operation to give you a facility that we can construct in very, very nicely. The other thing I just want to point out is we've gone through, and you can follow the legend in your handout, but anything that is a blue square is already identified as a major creek or river crossing. The stop sign that's purple is the rail crossing down here. The triangle and circles are wetland or other small tributaries that we're crossing. So we've already gone through environmentally, and we're identified exactly the areas that we're going to be facing when we come up from an environmental standpoint. So that really goes to what Carl was talking about. On the Fonzie side, all these aspects are now going to be looked at a little critically, and we've already started the process of getting that documentation pulled together for submittal back to DWI. So that just gives you an overview. Any questions on the routing? The other thing I'll add, and I meant to mention, from where we hit the right-of-way here to where we come off it over here at Brown Road, we've already talked to DOT, both in Chatham County and in Lee County, and they prefer that the west side of 15501, the west corridor, is the route we prefer. We have a lot of space over there. They have required or asked that we be 10 foot off the right-of-way, And as I told you, that is mostly through here is about 250, 260 foot wide. So we're going to be quite a bit off of the edge of the road, right along the right-of-way, which is going to be good from one standpoint because it protects the utility, it protects our force main. The other thing, the Deep River Bridge here is in a TIP that's going to be replaced. We already know and factored that in, and where we're routing this main is going to be outside of the construction zone. So the good thing is when this utility is installed, it will not have to be compromised when they build the bridge. And our timing will be, our utility will be in before the bridge project, which is scheduled to start probably 2019 if it still stays on schedule. So we've done a lot of thinking ahead to try to locate this main that's going to be best beneficial for the town and not create an issue moving forward as other development or construction changes happen in the corridor. So,
what's the process when this line goes to people's yards and all of that?
Well, that's a very good question. The routing that we've shown, basically, if it's not on public right-of-way, we have to look at securing easements. This alignment, and this is almost 14 miles of alignment. We calculated that we're looking at about 21 properties that are outside of DOT right-of-way that we're going to have to look at acquiring easements from. So we dramatically dropped the amount of easements we're going to get. But if it can't be in the right-of-way, typically you're going to have to get an easement from a private landowner. And we've tried to, again, route that kind of minimizes that as well.
So when you say 10 feet from the right-of-way, is 10 feet from the edge of the right-of-way within the right-of-way?
In the right-of-way, yes.
Not outside of it?
Correct.
And how do we, you mentioned the Deep River and the Rocky River.
Yes, sir.
Are we able to use the bridges, or do we have to bore under the rivers?
The plan is to directional drill under the rivers,
okay.
both rivers.
Wow.
Yes, sir.
And that's, I'm counting 7 creek and river crossings?
Well, there are numerous, like, unnamed tributary crossings.
I've got 16.
Yeah, the major crossings that are listed in blue here. This is Robeson Creek's here. I believe this is Turkey Creek here. We have Rocky River, and then the Deep River. Some of these are other smaller creeks, but those 4, the Robeson, Turkey, Rocky, and the Deep River, the plan is to directional drill. And what we'll be able to do is, what that's going to be is we'll be outside of the buffer zones that are designated within those areas and drilling so that we don't impact anything within the buffer. So basically we're drilling, starting outside the buffer, drilling under the stream and then coming up. The other smaller tributaries, the plan at this point, because it is permissible by the local regulations, whether it's one's governed by the town of Pittsburgh or what's governed by Chatham County itself, we're able to, as long as we follow the guidelines and we don't create additional mitigation, we can open cut those and reinstall exactly, to the elevation of what we cut. So that's a cost savings.
Wait. For creeks and rivers, we can open cut?
For smaller creeks and rivers. Yes.
Smaller creeks.
Yes, sir. I mean, even actually the Rocky and even the Deep, they could be considered open cut.
What open cut means exactly?
Physically, basically damming parts of the river, putting some cofferdams in, and digging from A to B right across it. And typically, for water body crossings like that, we try to go to directional drill, which does not harm that environment. And plus the buffers that are already established, we start outside of that buffer. So if this was the buffer from me to you, we start drilling here, I come out to you, we haven't impacted anything. So what that means from a permitting standpoint is we're able to expedite the permitting process. We don't create any mitigated issues for the town, which could result in some costs for, wetlands or things are displaced or damaged. There is some process depending on the amount that is impacted. So we try to take the major water bodies and do that directional drill. And we may actually, depending on what the environmental analysis, we may have to do more directional drill. It's really going to come to an economic analysis to what's best for the town, what is permittable, and then how's the best strategy to do it.
So what about wetlands? How do you
Same thing. First of all, try to avoid it the best we can. There are We do know the regulatory requirements of when we go through the wetlands, how we have to construct through it. Really what's going to be key here is the maximum or the total acreage that we look to displace. Rough figures, we've looked at that, we're right on the threshold of that where mitigation is required. So routing and alignment and trying to kind of be around those wetlands, and if it requires directional drill under wetlands, we can do that too. So we're going to take that all into effect to try to minimize any impact from permitting and any type of mitigation. So I hope does that answer the help? Any other questions before we move on? This is a similar graph to what Carl had showed you earlier. The only difference is we've talked about the phasing of it. This is now in visual form of what that phasing kind of looks like. The green line and the red line are still the same wastewater flow projection lines that you saw on the earlier projection graph. Basically what you have here is your existing 0.75 MGE plant. We've talked about the Chatham Park decentralized plant, 250,000 gallons a day capacity coming on. This is 2015, so this will be 16, 17, coming in by 2018. And then basically we believe by 2019, actually by hopefully third or fourth quarter of 2018, the actual pump station and force main will be completed construction. Based on the rate that we're going now and depending on when council gives us the ability to proceed with design, I could see us actually bidding the project at the end of the summer next year. We've got a 12-month construction period for the force main and the pump station, so we could conceivably be online by late 2018. What we've shown in this graph is basically pushing it to the start of 2019, just for the sake of purposes. But what you see is we're trying to show how this total combined wastewater generation is managed by the phasing. And so sometimes these lines get pretty close, but what we have here is we got a stair step with Chatham Park's addition. Then we have, this takes us total combined up to about 2.25 MGD. The 2 MGD going to Sanford plus this 250,000 gallons here. This line right here is like the next expansion that Tim talked about, going to 500,000 earlier. We show it starting at 2020 because that was information that the Chemicrete had given us. But realistically, as you see, this could be pushed back a few years, and ideally we want to push it back, which could be this could be maybe 3 years or more before the expansion has to come online to basically be above the total wastewater generated. At some point, 2025, 2026, this line is going to exceed, the 2 MGD to Sanford, the 500,000 that we've been talking about, and we've got to do some sort of regional type approach, probably a collaborative regional plant of some capacity. It'll be a little bit larger than what the 20-year need is that takes you out further. Now, what can really impact this growth chart is really what these lines do. I mean, they're wastewater projections based in the best manner that we can do. But if this line, it is a very, very solid approach, but if the growth occurs a little bit flatter than this, it pushes things out and you've got more time. If for some reason growth is such that it's accelerated and this slope is a little bit higher, these things need to be pushed forward. But the one point I want to get across is to manage what we're trying to do over 20 years. It's a collaborative approach of multiple components that help manage the wastewater that's generated. So that's really the idea of this graph of what it's trying to show. Carl talked a little bit about this earlier, so I'll kind of breeze through this. But council did approve for us to submit an application for funding last year. We were successful in getting that funding. In February, you received a notice or a letter of intent of that funding. That was, as we had stated earlier, the alternative to option 21.5 or say $21.6 million. That money is available to you right now. As Carl said, we're going through the timeline of the milestones that BWI has set before us. That is what has been reserved for this project. At the end, once we have these projects bid, the actual loan amount will be adjusted based on what the bid numbers come in. So just know that right now we have it up to available of up to $21.6 million. The project that we're looking at, what we are submitting, is about 19.7, Carl, million, about 1.8 for Lotus. So we're actually in the good that with this modified alternative, we've dropped pricing of the facilities, which I think is helpful. We talked about the deadlines for the EREID. The next deadline is November 1st, which was approval of the EREID by the Division of Water Infrastructure. That, and what we've described to you today, that will not occur. DWI is we're working with the town to allow us to provide an updated schedule, which will be a schedule that we can, meet and move forward. And we will continue the monthly meetings. That is a good thing that we've set up. Usually for projects like this, DWI does not set up meetings. I think what's good is the complexity of this project. It's very unique. It's unique in such that this type of project is one that they really haven't worked with before. So they're learning of how to manage it. Monthly meetings are going to help us, really go through this. And we've already had 2 of those. We have another one scheduled for the end of this month, and we'll continue that. So that's a good collaborative effort of all parties, and it involves McKim Creed, us, the town, and the regulators working on this project. So it gets us all in the room, and it's a really good approach that helps us move this project forward. So it's a very good benefit that we've got started on. And then lastly, this is sort of what are the next steps. We presented to you the modified alternative 4. We would look and ask that the board look to approve it. We need to submit that updated overall project schedule by November 1st. We need to get started with the additional environmental work for the EREID. And I will mention the contract amendment that I believe was presented to you on Monday that you approved. That has an aspect of moving that environmental work forward. So we've already started the process of getting that started. And then ultimately submit the revised documents to DWI. They'll approve them. We've got a FONSI process that takes a few months, maybe about 2 months for public notice and addressing any comments, but we need to get that started as quickly as we can. Draft agreements between Sanford and Chatham Park. They don't need final agreements, but they need draft form to hopefully approve the EREID, and that's been a requirement that they've been asking from the start. I know that some of those are closer than they have been. The other good thing is with these meetings, and as much as we've worked on this project and we've been able to support what we've provided in the engineering report, DWI has no problem with us moving forward with design. There is nothing that they see in the project as we have presented that's going to keep us from waiting till the engineering report is approved, which would delay our design efforts. So basically we can get started immediately based on their timeline and let the approval process go concurrent with us getting started. And so basically what we're hoping is that with council approval, we'll be able to start design on pump station force main plant improvements next month in November.
So we're not asking for any approvals this evening.
Correct. Correct. So, and then really the next slide is any questions that you may have.
Charles, you mentioned a cost estimate, I think, of 19.7. How much of that is contingency, or does that include a contingency?
It includes 10%. 10% contingency. Yes, sir.
Okay.
How would your recommendations change if it were that the town were able to acquire a tract of land to the northeast of the existing sewage treatment plant?
The whole process behind the engineering report is when it comes down to an economic analysis, they look at basically present worth values of alternative comparisons. It's an alternative that could be looked at. In fact, one of our alternatives did look at developing a larger facility off-site. And really, when you factor in all the costs and operational and maintenance factors, it all rolls into a present worth value. We've actually looked at that, and it's not going to come out as the most cost-effective solution as the alternative 4 that we're showing you here. And that's all part of the process itself. I mean, we vet all of the reasonable alternatives that we have, but you're looking at a facility, in terms of a treatment facility, it's going to cost quite a bit more than the $19 million that we're talking about here. And I think in the original, Carl, correct me, I mean, we looked at those, they were up in the $30, $40 million range. Is that correct?
Well, the other alternative, the capital cost was around 22, something like that. And then, but the present worth cost was quite a bit higher.
How is that documented?
It's in the engineering report itself.
Okay. I've tried to find a digital copy of that, and Ms. Alice has also. Is that something that we could read?
It is being revised to reflect this alternative 4, so.
Call correctly, is that alternative 1 or 3?
That's 3. 3 is to look at expanding on the existing, well, you can't expand on the existing site, you would have to get more land for sure. But it's looking at that.
Yeah, that's correct.
And it does consider a land acquisition scenario.
Yes.
Well, I don't know, it considers looking at how much land you would need in addition to what you would have. So I guess that would be a land acquisition scenario, I guess. You know, we didn't look at property owners and such. We didn't go into the report and identify this is this person's property, that's this person's property, or how hard it would be to buy or anything like that. We don't do that here.
The engineering
So
report
we identified
submitted
yes,
in
this
February
much,
is online.
you would necessarily need this much land, but it wouldn't, we didn't get into that. You know, when I think of land acquisition, I think
It's
of,
just a
you've gone,
hypothetical.
yeah, it's just,
I understand. I'm sorry, Mr. Cruz.
It's online. It's on the town's website. It's been on the town's website for quite a while.
Great. All right. Engineering? Or?
PER, the PER.
Okay, got it.
And that as is what was submitted originally, and just know that it has been modified through what we described tonight.
Okay.
The base components are there, projections, all of that is really.
Just go over to this the sidebar and the main. If you go to the main page, I'll back it all the way back. And that's the true clear see there's sidebar.
I can't see that, so what are you clicking on?
This is the top.
Seven phone.
So you go to pittsboro.nc.gov.
Yeah.
This is the main homepage.
Yeah.
You can find the documents so far for the revolving fund down here in the sidebar on this location right here. Where it says Clean Water State Revolving Fund Loan Application. So you click that, and then the PER, the latest, the most recent, or the submitted PER is right here. And so you have the table, you have all the documents. I remember spending like a half a day scanning all that stuff in because I couldn't find an electronic copy that had all this stuff in it.
Thank you, Marty.
Yep.
Any other questions?
Charlie, I think you said that these funds are now available to us, but I thought that there was an LGC level.
That still has to go through that.
You're not, okay, you got to qualify the statement available to us.
Yeah, I apologize. Yeah, what the loan that we requested is $21.585 million. The letter of intent to fund that loan has been provided from DWI to the town. That ultimate total loan amount will have to go through the LGC process. I didn't mean to mislead you, but that's for the project. That's what DWI has allocated available funds for the project. Is that?
And that's the February 1 letter.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And that also has the milestone schedule.
Yes, sir.
Exactly.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie.
That's about what we think. I don't have
Nine.
a lot, 9 months.
For next time.
Does the board wish to continue with anything else, or where are we? That would leave us one more meeting before the November 1st start.
We don't have to have it in by November 1st. We just have to have a schedule developed by November 1st. So you don't have to actually approve this by resolution by November 1st.
I was hearing something different.
There's that schedule that was in the letter of intent, and there's certain deadlines in there, and that's what we'd have to resubmit a schedule for those
New
deadlines.
project schedules by November.
Yeah, it's more like, what are the new deadlines? It's not like.
We could be flexible enough with that, I think. I don't think our intention, like I mentioned the other night, that our intention is not to, rush a decision. We want to be able to get this information out in front of you, ask questions, digest it, while we continue to work out and present some information from Davenport on October 24th, get an idea for what the financial lay of the land is on this, and then at some subsequent meeting after that, then when you're comfortable reviewing this issue or some other options. So.
It's the pleasure of the board. Evening, do you want to, is there a motion to adjourn? Or?
Have we gone through everything on here?
We have not discussed the elevated gym.
That was Mr. Baldwin's presentation. So I think we realized that, like you said the other night, that I think you guys needed to spend a lot of time with the wastewater treatment, the wastewater treatment issues, and you've certainly done that. And as has been mentioned a few times, there's some other things that we need to discuss as far as finances and then moving forward on an agreement actually for Sanford to accept the wastewater, and then also too an agreement with Chatham Park. So there's moving parts with all of this, and this is one of those parts that are moving. So we just want to make sure it's not moving too fast. As you can see, put plenty of time and effort, and as I mentioned before, we really needed some open mental space for you guys to kind of get at some of this stuff, and we can certainly come back to it here in the near future.
This has been helpful.
Very helpful. Mr. Grusbeck, I'm curious if you have had time to think about kind of an itemization of risks.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I continue to do. I mean, before this is all said and done, we can go into that as long as you want.
Would you be able to document your best guess of those?
Absolutely,
Okay.
Along with our able staff and consultants, I can definitely put that together.
Okay. Yeah, I'd like to see that before, certainly before we're asked to consider a resolution. It would be helpful to me to have time to reflect on that.
And if there's anything in the meantime, if anyone has any questions, or if they want to, sit and discuss and chew on some of this in some other way, shape, or form, I mean, I'm certainly available to do that. I think, like I said, I think we've made, the town's been at this quite a while, and I think we've made progress. As you can see, Mayor Perry, mentioned the McGill study, and I think what we've seen is what we've seen here. Was an honest attempt at making an evolution, a forward evolution in terms of cost and effectiveness from that McGill study in a number of ways, and so we're getting there. And I can certainly, do my best to work with staff and consultants, and based on your feedback, and come up with some more info to maybe summarize and review for you here in the very near future, or whenever you're comfortable with it. So.
Well, Mr. Baldwin greatly reassured me in some of my concerns, my vague, undefined concerns regarding transition period. And it's been reassuring to understand that, at least on paper, the old part of town will not be constrained. In fact, that the reclamation facility on Eubanks or off Eubanks might apparently will give us leeway in terms of paper capacity that will maybe even allow us to say our moratorium is done at some point when that's completed, I think he said. When that plant is completed, it doesn't have to be under construction, it has to be once it's completed. I think
What I said was he have a permit for 500,000, but would build the first phase at 250.
Yeah.
But could get credit for the whole 5.
Right. So I think I'm a little curious about where the boundaries lie with the difference between that paper capacity and real flows, and just how big the developments outside of the PDD, Shadow Park PDD, could get before we would run into trouble with exceeding our allocations or exceeding our capacity, either before the Sanford Force Main or even after it. And I remain curious about the price for Old Town ratepayers getting service at the EnviroLink facility in non-emergency conditions.
I don't understand the non-emergency conditions.
Well, you know, EnviroLink is a business. They're planning to provide a service. What would it cost Old Town to send sewage to that plant before the Sanford Force Main is completed, or maybe even in comparison to the Sanford Force Main option?
Is Mike still out here?
Yeah, that's certainly, we've run some rate models and compared them to the town. We're happy to sit down, probably not prepared to talk finances at this point because there's a lot of details we have to work out with the town yet that could impact it. But certainly want to engage in those discussions sooner rather than later so that we can present that information. The other thing, and Tim's not here unfortunately to talk about this, I got the floor here, so it's one of the things that's on the critical path for us. Coming back to the board here, sure we're going to talk about, Tim talked about apportioning part of the NPDS permit over to the reclamation facility, and that's fairly urgent for us so that we can get started with the construction. So we'll want to get back to the council pretty soon. He was going to talk to me about it, unfortunately.
Is the staffing of that plant such that it has to be done by somebody like a company like yours, that it would be outside the expertise of our current staff?
Certainly it would require a certified operator, but that's really, it can be either a town staff or a private.
So we have several certified wastewater operators, do we?
Yes.
When we talk about modification of the NPDS permit, is it simply the modification of where the wastewater is being treated? Instead of being at one location, it could be at 2 locations?
No, it's a little bit more. The state has indicated that they would want to issue a separate permit in our name. So they would issue, the town would have its permit, and we would have a separate permit for that facility.
And the idea is it's carved out of the existing at 3.22.
The Lotus Creek.
Oh, right.
So the one
Carved out of the
1.249 you have now would be reduced by 500,000 gallons. In fact, there's plant capacity now.
But
They just don't want any more. They don't want any more total flow going to the river than is permitted now.
Mm-hmm.
So they want to have a mechanism to go in there and make sure that that total flow doesn't, that is permitted now doesn't get higher than that now. So they have two permits so they can track they would track the other facility separately so they can sample that and make sure that that facility is meeting all requirements, even if there isn't another one discharging yet.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of look ahead and say, well, what if, they want to cover all the what ifs. So it would just, you still have your 1.249 flow that you could go to Rose, but it would be partitioned then.
Right.
Is there some reason that, it seems to me that it's almost as close to go to the hall from Evans Road.
Yeah, I think it's an equal distance. Just about.
Yeah, and there's an unused allocation flow, right?
There's no alcohol there. There's nothing going. There's 1.97 million gallons. Yeah, there's no pipe there now. There's nothing going there right now. The benefit of this is that you have a pipe there right now that you can use, so you don't have to build another pipe now. That's warranty.
I understand that, but also if we were feeling possessive about our 1.24, it seems like and if we just to go to the hall, it seems like that would be a really good utilization of that unused hall allocation.
Well, you also have the reuse aspect of that with 3M too, so that's the other purpose is to be able to provide that.
And I thought one of the most interesting things I heard this evening was the idea of if we did get a lot of I&I at our existing plant, that you could say, wait a minute, put the brakes on, pump it over to this other plant and hold it there for a little while or treat it there.
Yeah, initially the EQ tanks that we're talking about, that conversion with the existing EQ tank should initially at least make that unnecessary.
Yeah, but the idea of being able to pump back and forth was interesting to me.
Yeah, that's you're right. It's at some point.
Maybe we get the belt and suspenders, perhaps.
By going to Sanford, you buy that. You don't have to use that flow that you're going to, in your permit allocation right now. That 2 million gallons sends it the other way.
Right now.
Right now, and so eventually, you're right. You're going to have to, unless you do more flow to Sanford later, you're going to have to utilize the permits that you have now.
My understanding is that the permits that we have now were very expensive to acquire, and we've essentially been told by the state we aren't getting anymore. And so that's why one would perhaps be possessive about such things.
Well, I could understand that.
And let me ask you this. Did you say that there needs to be 2 permits? Did you say that?
Yeah,
one in the town and one...
That's what the state's saying right now.
Okay, so basically, how are you going to do that? So,
they would issue a permit to them separately, and they'd have to meter the flow that's going from their plant, and they'd have to sample the effluent from their plant and prove that they're meeting all whatever standards they're supposed to meet. And then if Pittsburgh started or made an upgrade or whatever to the existing site, they would then have to sample separately and flow meter separately from a theoretical future Pittsburgh treatment plant into something there. Did that answer the question?
You answered that question, but my concern still goes back to the permit, and I know it was very, very involved to get this last one. I mean, very involved, took a long, very, very long time. So basically, that is my concern. I don't like an idea of transferring our permit to a private third party.
Yeah, we have, and again, there's a lot of details that we need to work out between us and the town in terms of, but it's certainly that permit, even though the flow allocation might be going over this plant, it's still, town still have a mechanism for controlling how that gets used to ensure it's in the best interest of the citizens of Pittsburgh. The other thing is we can look at how we might be able to compensate the town for that allocation that we be bringing up. But those are a lot of the details in the discussion.
Definitely. Definitely.
I guess I feel like we need a master plan of some sort. You know, we're further along than we were before, but to me that last chunk that says that regional plan, where is that?
Yes.
Could it be something on the banks of the Jordan? Could it be something that is a Western Lake cooperational partnership and this kind of thing? And I just feel like that one of my fears of giving up any allocations is that we might later discover that we really need to go back to that point and acquire that land next to the old sewer plant, and we might need something there that we've in the meantime given up. And so a master plan to me that integrates both the water and the sewer and the, the map's lovely, but it still leaves some of an unanswered question, and I still feel like I'm, feeling the back end of the elephant. And
one of the slides I know that Charles put up there showed kind of how flow was flowing over time. He's looking out, 2035.
Right.
I think that's a key component here, kind of what you're talking about there. The master plan is looking at how the timing of all these things.
But it's only 8 or 9 years. It's only 8 or 9 years when we're going to need to be building our regional plan.
That's right. It depended on the growth.
Of course, yes.
Yeah, so
well, these are the projections that we have. So, yeah.
So alternatively, would you suggest, like we kind of started to discuss the other night, alternatively, would you suggest building a larger plant that takes into account this white area right here, even though we may be under a growth curve? You want to just expand that much capacity at a much earlier date that simply wouldn't be used? Or?
No, I imagine that this is a very well-beaten path, that municipalities have plenty of experience with building large facilities, well-planned facilities with efficiencies in mind in phased process. Even the Sanford regional plant has room for expansion. So I would reiterate the mayor's point that it'd be great to see a master plan of how we get through phase 1A, phase 1B, phase 2 to phase 3. How do we reach phase 3? How do we assure that this little plant off Eubanks is not just that the force main to Sanford and the plant off Eubanks are not just suboptimal measures in the grand scheme. What's convenient and helpful and expeditious in the near term may not be best for the town's long-term growth.
So, more capacity at an earlier stage.
That's not what I'm saying. I think the master plan is what I would prefer to call it. A coherent vision of how we get through each of those phases would be reassuring, that especially if we're going to contemplate the exclusivity. I still just don't understand that. Michael Fiocco, you put it perfectly. It's a commitment. Well, we're already making a commitment. If we're going to build a pipe, that's a heck of a commitment. Why on earth do we need to subjugate ourselves with an exclusivity? It seems to me that it only detracts from our flexibility with whatever plans we need yet unvisioned, yet
but it isn't,
unseen.
But it's an exclusivity only for a portion of our, it doesn't impact our discharge permit at all, which I think has been stated many times.
That's true.
So, and they're not suggesting that you're allowed to pump 2 million gallons to us and never do anything else.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, will you agree to build this infrastructure and pump the first 2 million gallons to us?
Mm-hmm.
That's all. I mean, that's the extent of the exclusivity, and clearly we need to make that more clear if it's not.
Well, in accordance with the interbasin transfer rules, 2 million gallons per day is all we can do anyway.
Right.
So
till we do something about it.
Limiting exclusivity to that is hollow.
I guess it makes me fear that at some future point they could say, Stanford, unless it was very carefully worded, Stanford could come back and say, well, okay, you all need 4 million now, and you all need to run another pipe down, and obligate us. If that exclusivity clause is not really carefully worded, we could end up having to build something that would satisfy a true amount of exclusivity, which would include Purple Pipe coming back so we could meet the interbasin transfer rules, or depending upon how the politics goes, maybe everything would be waived or changed legislatively anyway.
But I don't know how Sanford dictates anything.
They're already trying to by virtue of the exclusivity clause, I don't know.
It's only up to the 2 MGD. I mean, that's all they're asking.
That's the commitment they're requesting, but they're certainly not dictating.
Well, I hadn't seen it revised in writing. I know with my little simplistic mind, I had this vision that if the trench was open and we were laying pipe at Stanford, why couldn't we lay pipe in anticipation of reclaimed water coming back, or duplication of pipe because we got all clogged up on the original pipe. And what I've been told is that you're talking about multiplying the cost of this project just exponentially. But is there any saving by thinking that once the trench is open, that we should do something other than just run this one pipe straight shot to Stanford for 18 million?
Well, that has been discussed and considered, and cost is a big factor in doing that. We do know, or we expect, that reclaimed use in this area, not only in Chatham Park, but any other uses that we can develop in and around town, will reduce the amount of discharge that goes into the river. Things to consider, and I think this is a question that may have already been brought up, but you're talking about a 13, 14 mile pipe down and another one coming back. A lot of times the redundancies to try to build into that even become more costly, to do that. And that's a very long run. But it really, until you know what your reclaimed component is going to be and the magnitude of it, specifically, you're putting a pipe in that you don't know, have you captured the quantity or capacity that you need at it? Are you under, are you over? And if we let's say we put a 12-inch pipe coming back because we project this, is that going to be enough? Then you've got that cost in there, and then, hey, it doesn't get us all we need to get. I'm just throwing out, I Can it be done? Can things be put in the concrete? Yes. But cost is an impact, and just the driver is the need substantiated to bring that back this way.
Is it just simple enough to put another pipe in? Because I think as the ground's doing this, you're going to need multiple pumps along the way. There's just one single pump.
Should be more pump.
So another pump at this end might be able to send something back. So is it just this the additional cost of pipe? I mean, does the trench need to get that much wider?
It does get wider.
But substantially?
Well, again, it all depends on the line size.
Yeah.
But it could about double it, depending on getting separation between the two and
horizontal?
Yes, sir.
Can it be vertical?
They could probably be put side by side, because even though it's reclaimed water, it's still considered wastewater. So there wouldn't be, it's not like a potable.
So it doesn't have to have this 10-foot separation?
No.
There's a question with all the engineers in the room, maybe you can answer. If the basin that constricts us to this 2 million gallons a day, the sub-basin rule, if Chatham County is buying water from Sanford, which they do for the Southeast District, why doesn't that count against it already?
It's my understanding it is a net equation.
Is that how we got to the 2 million? I thought when we heard the presentation many times, and including tonight, that the 2 million is a rule, right? That they said that you can only do 2 million. But if Chatham County's purchasing hundreds of thousands or millions of gallons, why doesn't that already count and would allow you to have flexibility right now in that basin? Because Sanford's already selling into the basin.
Because we're not connected.
I'm just asking if anyone in here has an answer to that, or if that's something you want to come back to, but it seems like you would get a credit from the state.
A lot of things are possible.
You haven't brought it up? Okay, so I would then offer that might be a question
I'm
you'd
not sure
want to
how much
ask.
water they get. I don't think they get that much water.
I think it's going to be, I think it's related to the project specific, but the question could be asked. But typically, when you're looking at the transfer, it's direct transfer of a maximum over, and you can reduce that transfer. I mean, I guess it could be cumulative, but we haven't read the rule that states that it's allowable to do it.
So it would seem like that would be one thing to do, and if Chatham County ever got involved with this, then there would be a direct connect. I mean, when we built the line at 3M, it was a Chatham-Pittsboro cooperative effort.
Oh, it was Chatham Cooperative?
We cooperated, and the history of this is that when I first came here, and the mayor was Devaney, Charlie Horn came into that office, and we sat down just when I was a young guy building Chatham Forest, John, saying, we want to have a system with Chatham County and Pittsboro. And Chuck didn't like the idea of folding in the utilities with Chatham. And so there was a resistance at that point. We want to have our own, and Chatham hadn't even built water lines at that point. Margaret was still on the board, they're still thinking about that. Now we roll ahead 20 years, and during that time, we've always had the issue with the plant. The plant was 750 million, that you could treat, but it turns out we never could get to the 750 because there were other limitations of the mechanical process of the plant, protocols, regulations, and only recently have we gotten to the ability to get to that max. I didn't even know that when I started here. I found that out when I was sitting on the board. And that's when we did the EQ base, and that allowed us to actually get more hydraulic capacity through there. So I think, John, if you go through that report and the others that are available, you're going to find an awful lot of research that was done in the last 6 years. And then if you go way back to when Hugh Montgomery was here, there was more. There's always been a desire to figure out how to fix this problem, and there's never been a really easy, good solution. The permit that we did with Hobbs, so Pam started with me on that, that cost, it was expensive. I think it was $68,000, and there was more into getting it. But we pushed it through to have a hedge, because we knew if we didn't have a permit, then certainly Sanford would have us over a barrel, because they'd say you have no choice, because the state is requiring you to treat the higher protocols to remove phosphorus, nitrogen, as Fred has probably told you before, and that we were ultimately going to be backed into a solution. So that's always kind of been there as our safeguard, but it was never the intent to just go and discharge it to the haw. I mean, nobody really wanted to do that. There were a lot of resistance from, our friends, the river keepers, for instance, the kayakers. They didn't like it, even if you read the public minutes from the hearings, but we got the permit. And then that part of the permit you're talking about, that was that effort where we went up there and moved it just because it made no sense to not have the ability to discharge an extra 500,000 gallons here. Why would we need to go 8 miles down the river to do it? The Sanford idea came into play because it seemed like the most economical solution, and we always preach regionalization. So I know Pam has been in Triangle J forever, but that's always been the idea, to cooperate. I know it's a leap for you guys to think about this, but ultimately, if you could do this, it would be a very positive step to see municipalities cooperate. It's tricky, Mayor. I mean, I'm not saying this is easy, but it's something we always preach to Triangle J, to do something like this.
But now we're at the nitty-gritty part of looking at how much of a percent of Sanford's debt service we'll have to pay, and whether we're paying on actual usage or allocation of capacity. I mean, it's somehow or another, it's not looking like the good deal that it looked like a while ago.
Well, you referenced the McGill study again, and look at what they were proposing to charge us per thousand. It was $260 per thousand back in 2012, or whatever it is.
Right.
The rate now, just on commodity alone, based on the information that we discussed in the first meeting in September when we discussed the agreement, is based on actual usage, as those 3 audits showed that it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 108 to 118, I think, per thousand. So obviously there's progress being made, and I think those permits that Randy's talking about and Pamela worked on, and you referenced earlier as being valuable, they are in fact valuable, and I think it has made a difference. And I think eventually, as has been pointed out previously, eventually they can be used in future phases. We just have to exercise diligence to continue to approve them. They're in hand. They're gold. They're sitting in hand. They're not going anywhere so far as we exercise the administrative diligence to maintain them. And they present us with options moving forward. And again, give us leverage on future negotiations. But I definitely think that in talking to Hal and Vic from Sanford again today, I think we've definitely headed in the right direction with them.
The other thing to think about is, like I showed on the graph, you have 3.22 capacity in your furnace. And so if our projections are right, you're going to hit 4.41 in 20 years. So you're not going to have enough capacity with your existing discharge permit to handle all the wastewater necessarily. And there's other issues that go into that, but the bottom line is if you go to Sanford, then you've just bumped up that to 5.22. It gives you more breathing room with your own permits. It says you can take time to look at those permits more. That's part of a long-range plan. In fact, is you can look at that permit and you say, okay, well, we don't have to worry about hitting against that permit right away. We've got more time to think about, well, do we want to put a regional plant up where Shannon Park is building their own plant now, to rent land there, or do you want to try to buy property next to the existing plant and build there? So, in a way, by going to Sanford, you're buying yourself more planning time in the end, really, because right now, if you look at 2018, that growth line is coming on you pretty quick here. And there's not going to be a whole lot of time to restudy this for another 2 years.
Well, and looking at some of the old studies, it just gets turned over and over, and had the decision been made back in 2011, we wouldn't be in this mix that we're in now. I'm not saying that the Sanford line is a waste of money. I'm just saying at some point, yes, it would have to be done to finish off that capacity need, but I'm just trying to explore all the alternatives because I don't have that kind of grip on the matter.
One of the benefits of going to Sanford now also is that
they're only getting 4 million gallons,
Yeah,
and they got 12 million gallons.
I
But if you wait 20 years, they may say, well, we can't take it now.
Well, Mayor, I would actually offer one. In the perfect world, I would have wished we could have gotten 4 or 5 million to go there, but we have this issue of the integration transfer. But in the meetings that I had, and I know Mike was at one of those when the mayor was Commissioner Olive before Mayor Mann, there was discussion that they had looked at their plant, this 12 million gallon plant, that New Buffalo site, that potentially that they would go beyond the Buckhorn Dam at some point in the future. This is all part of their long-range plan. And it was possible that if Chatham and Pittsburgh were partnered up here, we could take that New Buffalo. That actually was discussed 4 years ago. So that we wouldn't have a plant up here, we'd have that plant. So they have their own long-range, 50-year utility plan. And part of it was they might build another plant further down. So, if Pittsburgh and Chatham became the biggest user in that plant besides Sanford, there might be other options. I mean, you're the big player there. Because they're not going to have the kind of growth you're going to have. It's just not going to happen.
No, I think this graph represents a master plan of sorts. And we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 of the 5 components identified.
It's just the last one.
It is.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that we need to have every question answered to start moving down that path.
No, we don't need every question answered, but that big chunk at the top, I want to make sure we don't do something that will narrow our choices.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we don't, if we know that it's politically unpopular to go to the hog, and we know that that we don't have the land for a land application system, and we know that we can't do any more to Sanford without some change in the interbasin transfer rules, then already we're limited as far as our options are concerned. And I just don't want to limit them, even more by mothballing or refurbishing or whatever the nice term is, the plant that provides our treatment system currently. I mean, I don't know what the useful life of a sewer plant is, but I'm assuming that it works well enough to get us through now, and that.
Well, it doesn't work well enough to get us through now because we're out of capacity, right? I mean, we will put another moratorium in place within probably a year's time if we don't take action and do something about it. Now, what I heard tonight that I've yet to hear was the idea of transforming portions of our plant to EQ bases, and that in fact the vision, part of that vision is to maybe create have it revert to actual treatment and discharge. So that I think is a very positive step in my mind, another step towards that next piece that we don't have fully identified yet.
And that was one of the questions we asked was how long would that take to put that in action? It wasn't that long, really, so it's still possible that doesn't have to be done right away as far as planning for another expansion on the commercial treatment plant that we should try to do that.
But
We do need to have a time frame where we would need to look at that.
When I looked at that chart, I said, okay, we've got lots of answers, and that's a big one we don't have answers. We need to start planning it now. But I don't think we need to plan it, understand it, know it, in order to take action.
We need to have a time that says, okay, this is when you need to decide.
Yeah.
Not necessarily we have to have an answer now because things are going to change. I think there's a lot of innovation going on with that, but at least to have a place on that chart that says this is when we really need to start.
Right. And I think you back into what does it take to get a permit? Well, we've got a permit. Now, if we don't like the discharge point, that's another modification to a permit.
What I want to know is how did Sanford get such a huge wastewater treatment plant and how can we get it? I mean, what they must have had how did they get that?
Was it Dennis Griffin? All of his political pull?
I don't know. But they did it, they got...
Well, I think they're discharging downstream at
Lake, Jordan Lake.
They're beyond the.
Yeah, they're,
So that's one big piece of this, is they're not discharging.
they're not this huge.
So they get,
Yeah.
so they don't worry about that discharge much, because it's not going to Jordan Lake.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's the big worry, is going to Jordan Lake. So by going downstream of that, I think that might be, I don't know, I wasn't involved with it, but I'm guessing that might be part of the reason to take that down.
If I could maybe help, I've done a lot of thinking about this. And two things that have come to mind last month have been the current wastewater plant could be reverted back to treatment at some point relatively easily. It would cost money to do. That's one positive. Or we can make sure it can be. And the other thing is to make sure we can pump raw sewage from our plant to the reclamation plant so that it actually can treat water from Old Town Pittsburgh, if you will, on a basis of need or what have you. Emergency or not, or even as a standard operating procedure. Because that plant, we heard tonight, could go up to 1 MGD. They've got the territory to do it.
Yeah.
And those two items alone, I think, help dampen the Sanford issue, because it's local.
Well, so, thank you, Fred, for pointing that out. When we hear that, when I hear that, I'm thinking, okay, so why are we building pipeline to Sanford? If we can access capacity on Eubanks, off Eubanks Road, it eliminates the urgency for the force main to Sanford.
Well, there's still the discharge questions. The argument that we need that 2 MGD, so why not get it now when we can get it for a great price? And then we can worry about local discharge in the future, increasing local discharge in the future.
We're not increasing the capacity of our existing plant in any way, and that's where Sanford comes in, and is it allows us to increase our capacity at the lowest possible price, while giving us time to plan out for these master plans that can get us through future phases. And again, as far as these interconnections between our existing plant and the reclamation facility, as you and I talked that one day, and I passed along those concerns, it became clear to me that that is entirely possible, and that we can build in those safeguards with a new existing plant. Right now, we don't have any safeguards. We have nothing. We bypass and we face the risk of fines. So I think these are, like Fred said, I think these give us plenty of options with more capacity at a lower price.
And really, without the Sanford option, we're limited to 322 as far as discharge.
322.
That's the total permit we have.
3 million.
Yeah, 3,220,000.
Hopefully this will just help in your consideration of just one piece of information about the Sanford plant. When we talked about it being 12 MGD capacity, and they're currently 4 MGD, we talked earlier first off about paper capacity.
Yeah.
That analysis was done we looked at that. What is their availability, and how does it look, what is their percent? I told you, they're just over 4 MGD for all permitted flow, not yet tributary, plus the 4 MGD. Looking as far as they didn't give me a timeline. They just said this is all we have. 7.5 MGD is what they have on it. So the opportunity that dynamic may change, and that's a good driver to get it sooner rather than later.
Right.
If from an economical benefit at all.
Well, that makes me feel a little bit better about it. I've always felt like we were being pushed into a corner on the Sanford line, but that makes me feel like we perhaps got a bit more leveraging than I had anticipated. So.
The other piece is if we can avoid needing to treat or needing to discharge by reclaimed use, which is what we need to really keep pushing real hard, then we avoid that 80-90 rule down the line. We can move all these boxes to the right.
And that is a component that really hasn't been talked about or promoted. But there is going to be a tremendous expectation for reclaim use. It's going to be out there. So that's hard to predict now, but it's going to change and move this dynamic as it develops. The only way that's going to develop is when growth happens. For it to have, you have the source, but you got to have the need for the user. So
Shirley, help me envision those needs. I know a little bit about reuse, but dangerously little. What are those?
For reuse,
what's that market going to look like?
I mean, it could be anywhere from irrigation. Currently, they use it for, you can use it for street sweeping and cleaning, construction. We talked about cooling towers and processed water, non-contact type water. There's even, that's what the rules are today, and we expect the rules to allow more uses in the future. But basically, what I understand of what the development is looking at is they are focusing on any and all aspects that's available to them to reclaim water as they grow. And I think that's fantastic because that is going to be a key component to this future timeline. But mainly, I mean, if we produce basically right now there's type 1 and type 2 reclaim. Type 1 is the type reclaim that Pittsburgh is currently producing the 3 in. Okay. Type 2 requires a more significant disinfection step, which opens it up where that reclaimed water could be used on direct food chain crops and things like that. But it's a higher level of complexity. They're looking at different organisms in there. So from a irrigation standpoint, if they're for farming, or it opens it up. So basically, any type, your toilets, your cooling towers, if there's any industrial is separated. I mean, non-potable uses can be supported with reclaim. And it's high quality. So it's really, it's on the verge of expanding over time, and it's going to have to. That's part of a resource moving forward. It's got to be implemented everywhere.
You mentioned toilets. You can flush reclaimed water at the CCC library legally, but you can't do it at the condo or at the apartment or at the house. And so there's currently a push at the state level to pass a law, and I don't know what the current status is. I don't know if you guys, to allow Purple Pipe to go into individual residences to flush toilets. That would be a huge number to not have to discharge if that water just kept recycling in our sewer system forever. We would never discharge it.
So currently, you all are planning to bring Purple Pipe into the commercial nodes, but you don't yet have the agreement to be able to, or the state law to be able to bring it to residents. Is that right?
We're going to bring it to the residences, but they don't have permission to flush the toilet. They can irrigate, wash your car, wash your dog, do anything outside that's not vegetable or edible related. So a lot of water can be used for irrigation and washing cars. But we're estimating 5 years the state will allow residences to flush the toilet.
And this is done in other states, so it's not, North Carolina's not breaking new ground with this.
All fields and common areas and medians will all be irrigated with Purple Pipe water, the reused water.
This would make a great place for Chatham County and Pittsburgh, who've always been environmentally concerned, to pass a resolution to send it to Robert and Valerie to go to the legislature and say, hey, advocate to change this, because we've been talking about this law for at least 15 years about making changes to law, and it's been slightly tweaked. But that one change, Mayor, would significantly change this whole equation and really be an environmentally sound way of going. I mean, it's not a big leap to be flushing reused water in the toilet. It's just we don't choose to do it in North Carolina, but we could.
Can I say one thing in house? Tim's at Wake Med doing fine. His wife and daughter there and his neighbors, so he's stable, hopefully recovers. He was going to talk about a memorandum of understanding
for the NPDES permit to take place would be between council and the builder of the other treatment plant, North State. We can talk about that, didn't have a chance. Brian and Paul Messick both have a copy of that memorandum to look at the legalese. I think there's no doubt that Chatham Park, to meet the stopgap, we got stuff coming online, as you've seen in all our stuff. We have to build our plant. We would love for the town to build it, you know, you don't have the money. We're talking $10 million for this stopgap plant. We would love to be a town, run by the town, owned by the town, just like we go to Cary or APAC, so we just are going to the line. We don't have to build our own plant. That's not possible here. You don't have the money. You only got money, $21 million, to build the line to Sanford if you choose to do that. So, just in my mind and hearing everything, we got to build that plant, and we got to do it as soon as possible. The only way we can start on it is to have the permit, the 499,000 gallons transferred in some fashion. Y'all still can control at site plan who gets the sewer, and it's not Chatham Park sewer, it's the whole town sewer. So if somebody else wants to tap on, they can tap on. I mean, it's a town. We're not Chatham Park here in town. It's all, if somebody takes a poop downtown, it don't matter what side of the street it's on, it's all Pittsburgh poop, you know? I mean, that's what we got to look at. But we need to move forward with that, and we got to move fast because we got stuff coming online. Whether you do the Sanford or build a big plant down the road, I mean, those are decisions you got to work through financially because that's more based on your financial capability. But I think we have to build this. Is that not the consensus that we have to go ahead with our plant to meet the stopgap? We kind of get some head nods there or something. I mean, it's costing this man $10 million to do it, and he's doing it because the town can't afford to do it. So we need some head nods. I need to get the memorandum. We need to get the paperwork started because the only way we're going to get this plant built is to start with the paperwork, and it takes, you know, what, 8-9 months to get the paperwork done. But we're going to be designing, so we got to get started. So if we could have your help there while you're pondering all these other things, I think we have to do that. Thinking back 6-7 years ago, when Bill Terry was town manager, I went through 20 meetings on sewer plants. He was proposing a $56 million sewer plant in Pittsburgh. $56 million. If that would have went forward, we'd all be bankrupt. I mean, I don't know where we'd have got the money. Just, you remember, you were around then?
Yeah.
$56 million, 4 million gallon sewer plant. So now we're down to sending Sanford for 18-19 million, picking up 2 million extra on our discharge permit. So we're going from 322 to 522. We've come a long way in 6 years. I think that was a little misguided back then. You know, that was Bill's. That was his idea. He liked big sewer plants. So I would just ask you, from Chatham Park standpoint, if we could move with building our plant a little quicker and get some understandings and get some negotiation with Brian and Mike over here, figure out all that work.
Yeah, like Mike said, and I know Mayor Perry has alluded to it, and other board members as well, about the value of the NPDES permit. And I think that Mike, I'd like Mike and I to sit down and really talk about how we can get some value out of that NPDES permit and how we might be able to make that work for us, because I agree with you all and all your suggestions and input on that. And there may be a way to recoup some of those costs and some of the work that was put into those permits back in the day. So we can present that. We can come up with some ideas and present you with some options on that.
Yeah, and we need to see that.
Before you approve an MOU. Yeah, definitely.
Are we about, is there a motion to be made to adjourn, seeing as how we're...
Motion to adjourn.
Correct.
Moved by Carol Baldwin, seconded by Jay Farrell. Thank you. Those in favor, please say.